Chapter 4655. In the dark trench not only was the divine power rich, but it was also closer to the heavenly Tao. Yunyao tried to break through to the God Emperor level again, and she could feel the power of the heavenly Tao more clearly. She was like a whirlpool, crazily devouring the divine power of heaven and earth from all directions. Only when she had accumulated enough divine power could she break through the limit, integrate the precepts and comprehension of the heavenly Tao and condense the Tao. During this process, with the dark trench as the center, the divine power of heaven and earth within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles surged faster. The divine power of heaven and earth in all directions was attracted and rushed toward the trench. Farther away from the trench, the divine power of heaven and earth was not very obvious, and could only be sensed with divine sense. Within a radius of 100,000 miles from the trench, one could clearly see strands of five-colored divine power gathering from the surroundings, like billions of small streams converging into a river rushing toward the trench. The dark seabed within a radius of 30,000 miles of the trench was filled with the five-colored divine light, and it became as bright as day, especially dazzling. The trench became the center of the whirlpool, like a bottomless pit, crazily devouring the divine power of heaven and earth. Yunyao was immersed in her cultivation and she did not care about the changes in the outside world. However, the sea beasts around the trench were frightened by this sudden change. They never would have thought that the Black Rock region, which had been peaceful for 20 years, would suddenly have an overwhelming amount of five-colored divine light. That inconspicuous dark trench also became the center of the divine power gathering, like a whirlpool flickering with divine light. What had happened? Had a rare treasure appeared in the trench? Or had the space shattered, the barrier collapsed and a black hole appeared? Within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles, tens of thousands of sea beasts were terrified, and their hearts were filled with questions. And the ones who were the most frightened were naturally the electric eel and the bony fish. The two of them were closest to the trench, only a few hundred miles away. They were cultivating in seclusion when suddenly, they were drowned by the divine light. At that moment the electric eel and the bony fish were scared out of their wits. They almost forcibly ended their cultivation and immediately jumped up. Fortunately, the endless five-colored divine light was not aggressive, and did not cause any damage to them. After the initial panic, the electric eel and the bony fish gradually calmed down. They began to search for the center of the five-colored divine light and tried to deduce the reason for its appearance. Thus, they soon found the dark trench that was thousands of miles long and tens of thousands of feet deep. Above the trench, the area within 30,000 miles was filled with the five-colored divine light, as if a five-colored sun had appeared at the bottom of the ocean. The surging five-colored divine light constantly washed over the bodies of the electric eel and the bony fish, causing them to tremble all over. Even if they did not take the initiative to absorb it, their bodies would be forcibly filled with endless divine power. They felt refreshed and energized. Their strength continued to rise and so did their auras. Such a shocking scene caused them to be shocked, and they couldn't help but guess and fantasize about exactly what sort of treasure and what sort of expert was capable of causing such an intense vortex of divine energy. Perhaps only an emperor-grade divine artifact or a god emperor would be able to do that, right? The electric eel and the bonefish hesitated for a moment and discussed in private. Only then did they summon the courage to enter the trench and explore the final destination of the five-colored divine light. Bathed in dazzling divine light, they passed through the turbulent storm of divine light and entered the deepest part of the trench. In the end, they discovered that the massive amount of divine energy of heaven and earth had disappeared near a rock wall. However, they had no idea where the divine energy of heaven and earth had gone after entering the rock wall. The electric eel and the bonefish speculated that if this storm of divine energy was caused by some sort of treasure of heaven and earth, then the treasure would be hidden in the dark brown rock wall. As long as they could dig through the rock wall, they would be able to obtain the treasure and that would be a huge gain. Both of them were middle-level divine kings, and if they could obtain a god emperor grade treasure of heaven and earth, they could quickly break through to high-level divine king, or even become a peak divine king. If they worked hard enough and had sufficient talent and comprehension, it was not impossible for them to break through to god emperor grade in a few years' time. With this thought in mind, the electric eel and the bonefish were very excited, and could not wait to release their divine senses to explore the rock wall. They were very familiar with this dark trench and in the past tens of thousands of years, they had come here no less than 10 times. In their opinion, although the dark brown rock wall was tough, it was nothing to be afraid of. However, when they extended their divine senses, they could not penetrate the rock wall and investigate the situation inside the rock wall. What's going on? Our divine senses seem to be blocked by an invisible force. The electric eel and the bonefish looked at each other, and there was some doubt and seriousness in their eyes. It should be the power of a god emperor, or else we should be able to investigate. Looks like we guessed right, this rock wall is most likely hiding an emperor-level treasure. But we have been here many times in the past, and we have never felt the aura of an emperor-level divine object, nor did we see anything unusual. There's always a first time for everything. Maybe that treasure was not fully grown before? Alright, we'll believe you for now. We are the closest to this place and also the first to discover the treasure here. We have to get the treasure as soon as possible, or other experts will come to snatch it and we won't have a share. That's right. The birth of the treasure has caused such a huge commotion. I'm afraid the sea beasts within hundreds of thousands of miles have been alerted, and they will definitely come to check the situation. The electric eel and the bonefish discussed telepathically as they tried to find a way to investigate the situation inside the rock wall. Their divine senses could not penetrate the rock wall, so they released their divine power trying to dig through the rock wall. However, there was always an invisible force protecting the rock wall, and even if they attacked with all their might, they would only be dissolved or even bounced off. Within 15 minutes, the electric eel and the bonefish had tried 6 or 7 methods, but none of them worked. The two of them were somewhat desperate. The electric eel suddenly remembered something, and immediately became somewhat frightened and coward. We seem to have forgotten something 20 years ago, that god emperor of the foreign race. After the bonefish heard this, it also instantly recalled that matter and trembled in fear. The two of them could not help but distance themselves from the rock wall, and did not dare to casually try to attack again. You mean, that god emperor of the foreign race has not left, and he is here in seclusion to recover from his injuries? It should be possible, or there would not be such a huge commotion. Moreover, only a god emperor could release such a powerful force to prevent us from investigating. But, it has been 20 years, his injuries should have healed long ago, right? I'm just saying that he could still be here. No one knows what is hidden inside the rock wall. Just as the electric eel and the bonefish were discussing in private, many figures flew over from all directions. At least a few hundred sea beasts of different appearances rushed over from all directions, rushing towards the trench. Clearly, the alarmed sea beasts in the surroundings were quickly gathering. Chapter 46-56. Hundreds of sea beasts rushed into the trench excitedly, and the first ones they found were the electric eel and the bony fish. Many sea beasts confirmed that the trench in front of them was the source, so they surrounded the electric eel and the bony fish and asked them about the situation. There were too many sea beasts, and they surrounded the electric eel and the bony fish, blocking the trench completely. The voices filled the brains of the electric eel and the bony fish, making them confused and unable to answer. They had no choice but to say that they didn't know anything and that they didn't find anything. As they spoke, they squeezed their way out, passing through the sea beasts with difficulty and escaping the dark trench. Those sea beasts had finally found this place, so of course they wouldn't leave and they wouldn't ask the electric eel and the bony fish. They would rather search in the trench, hoping to find some clues and find the hiding place of the heaven and earth treasure. After the electric eel and the bony fish left, more and more sea beasts came from all directions and gathered near the trench. At least 3,000 sea beasts entered the trench and started a carpet search, swearing to find the reason for the gathering of the divine light. Other than the electric eel and the bony fish, no sea beasts knew about the god emperor of the other tribes. All the sea beasts thought that this trench could swallow a huge amount of divine power and form a sun at the bottom of the sea, and that some rare treasure was about to appear. Most of the sea beasts were at the divine lord realm, and the remaining few were at the godly king realm. They also wanted to obtain the heaven and earth treasure to quickly increase their strength and reach a higher level. However, thousands of sea beasts searched the entire trench, but they didn't find the heaven and earth treasure and they couldn't find the reason. Only a few dozen sea beasts found a certain rock wall, which seemed to be covered by a mysterious power, and they couldn't explore it. Some of the bolder sea beasts tried to attack the rock wall, trying to break open the rock wall to see what was hidden inside. However, the various divine spells they cast were like clay oxen entering the sea when they landed on the rock wall. There was no effect at all. Even the divine power of heaven and earth within a radius of hundreds of thousands of kilometers, which had been condensed into all-encompassing multicolored divine light, would be devoured by that rock face. It wasn't hard to imagine that the divine powers used by the Divine Lord Realm and Godly King Realm sea beasts were also swallowed. Such a unique scene attracted even more sea beasts, and they all tried to break through the stone wall. As the news spread, more and more sea beasts came to know that the source of the problem was in that cliff. However, the thousands of sea beasts took turns to attack and pry into the cliff, but they were all helpless. None of them could see the secret behind it. 2 days later, more than 10,000 sea beasts gathered near the dark trench. At least half of the sea beasts had tried to explore the cliff either alone or in groups. The end result was the same: nothing. After those sea beasts failed in their attempts, they became more and more certain that there was an emperor-level divine object or treasure hidden in the rock wall. However, they wouldn't waste any more of their efforts. They all retreated and watched the other sea beasts attack from the side. As for the electric eel and bony fish, they had been staying above the trench, silently observing the situation. In any case, after this incident, they could no longer stay in their nests and territories. There were sea beasts everywhere. Other than watching the show, they could only absorb some of the 5-colored divine light to quickly increase their strength. Unknowingly, 5 days had passed. At this time, the number of sea beasts gathered around the trench had reached 30,000. All the sea beasts that had reached the Godly King Realm had attacked that cliff. There were even more than 20 Godly King Realm sea beasts that had joined forces to attack it. However, all of their efforts were in vain. That cliff was safe and sound, and the 5-colored divine light in the surrounding tens of thousands of miles was as dazzling as ever. On the other hand, the sea beasts found that their strength was increasing after staying around the trench for a few days. It was much faster than their cultivation speed by several times. This discovery made the tens of thousands of sea beasts happy. They were even more determined to stay around the trench and refused to leave. Most of the sea beasts had the same idea. Even if they couldn't find the secret in the cliff, they wouldn't be able to obtain the rare treasure. As long as they stayed near the trench and bathed in the 5-colored divine light, they would be able to increase their strength quickly. In short, it was a win-win situation. However, as more and more sea beasts gathered, the news spread in all directions. More sea beasts found out that the 5-colored divine light's final destination was in that trench. Bathed in the 5-colored divine light, their strength could increase rapidly. Therefore, at least 100,000 sea beasts were tempted. They all rushed to the center of the Black Rock region and headed to that trench. 10 days later, the number of sea beasts gathered around the trench had reached 80,000. More sea beasts were still on their way. The news spread throughout the entire Black Rock region. At least 1 million sea beasts knew that a rare treasure and an emperor-level divine object had appeared in the center of the Black Rock region. All the sea beasts that received the news would think of the incident that had happened 20 years ago. At that time, the two lords Xianbing and Zidian didn't give any explanation. They forcefully ordered all their people to vacate the center region and stay at the edge of the region for 5 years. The million sea beasts couldn't help but think that the appearance of the divine object was most likely related to that incident. The electric eel and the bonefish were completely helpless. There were sea beasts everywhere under the 5-colored divine light. Especially near the trench, there were sea beasts everywhere. Even their nests and cultivation grounds were occupied. It couldn't be helped. The sea beasts that occupied their nests had the strength of an upper divine king. The two of them couldn't afford to offend them. The 80,000 sea beasts were all in a lazy posture. Bathed in the 5-colored divine light, they were cultivating and increasing their strength. They were very satisfied and comfortable. Moreover, as time passed, more sea beasts would rush over. As for how long the 5-colored divine light would last, no one could be sure. As the two sea beasts that knew the inside story, the electric eel and the bonefish, started to worry about a problem. With so many sea beasts gathered here, something would happen sooner or later. If there was a treasure hidden in the trench, tens of thousands of sea beasts would definitely fight for it when it appeared in the future. It would definitely lead to a massacre. If there wasn't a treasure hidden in the trench, but the god emperor of the other tribe. In the future, if the god emperor of the other tribe was angered, he might start a massacre. Tens of thousands of sea beasts would suffer. In short, it was definitely not a good thing for so many sea beasts to gather here. After a few days of hesitation and consideration, the electric eel and the bonefish finally decided to send a message to report the situation to the two lords and ask them to make a decision. After sending the message, the electric eel and the bonefish stayed near the trench and waited patiently. However, what they didn't expect was that the five-colored divine light that had lasted for 12 days would gradually dissipate on the second day. The divine power that had gathered from all directions rapidly weakened. The five-colored divine light within tens of thousands of miles was also swallowed by the rock wall. Previously, the trench was as bright as day. Now it was dark and cold again. Chapter 46-57. After the five-colored divine light disappeared, the bottom of the sea returned to darkness and coldness. Those 80,000 sea beasts were originally cultivating very comfortably and quickly increasing their strength. Now that the five-colored divine light had disappeared, the sea beasts were all awakened and were discussing in disappointment. However, there were also some sea beasts who claimed that the disappearance of the five-colored divine light meant that the emperor-level divine object was about to appear. After the news spread, the surrounding tens of thousands of kilometers were in an uproar. Tens of thousands of sea beasts were all agitated. They roared and rushed to the trench like crazy, filling the entire trench. Countless sea beasts were looking forward to what treasure would appear in the rock wall. Was it an emperor-level divine artifact? Or an emperor-level divine object? A natural treasure? Could it be metal or medicinal herbs? However, the 80,000 sea beasts did not manage to wait for the divine object to appear. Instead, they saw a divine light that blotted out the sky above the chaos sea. Endless lightning flashed, crimson clouds surged, and sacred golden light cut through the chaotic fog like the sun, dispersing the darkness on the surface of the sea. Loud rumbling sounds came from the surface of the sea and became increasingly dull at the bottom of the sea. There was also an invisible and terrifying heavenly might descending from above the chaos sea, enveloping the surrounding 50,000 kilometers of the trench. More than 80,000 sea beasts were enveloped by the invisible heavenly might. All of them were so frightened that their expressions changed drastically, revealing terrified expressions. At first, some sea beasts were frightened and could not help but flee frantically, causing huge chaos. However, as the heavenly might became more and more intense, the scene of thunder and lightning became more and more intense. All the sea beasts trembled in fear and crawled at the bottom of the sea, not daring to run around. Filled with fear, all the sea beasts temporarily gave up on the idea of snatching the treasure. They admired and respected the heavenly Tao the most. How could they dare to do anything under the cover of the heavenly might? However, most of the sea beasts would still think to themselves, it must be an emperor-level divine object. Only then would it trigger such a phenomenon and descend the heavenly Tao's divine might. Many sea beasts were waiting for the heavenly might to dissipate so that they could see the divine object appear. At that time, everyone would rely on their own abilities to see who would be able to obtain the treasure. In fact, Yun Yao cultivated wholeheartedly for 12 days under the protection of the emperor-level array formation in the rock wall. She absorbed an endless amount of divine energy and heavenly Tao energy, and finally broke through the limit of the God-King realm, successfully condensing her first Tao pattern. The moment the five-colored Taoist rhyme was formed, her entire body was bathed in brilliant light. Her body and Godhead were both refined by the heavenly Taos, and she successfully ascended to the God-Emperor stage. It was precisely because she had broken through to the God-Emperor realm that such a violent phenomenon had occurred, affecting an area of hundreds of thousands of kilometers. In fact, this was also because she had broken through in the Chaos Sea. Too many heaven and earth phenomena were obscured by the Chaos Fog and Chaos Sea. If she were to break through to the God-Emperor realm on land, the phenomenon of heaven and earth would extend for millions of miles, startling billions of living beings. Now she was immersed in the sublimation of breaking through to the God-Emperor realm. Her entire body was bathed in divine light and the power of the heavenly Tao, and her divine Tao foundation was gradually solidifying. The heaven and earth anomaly lasted for 3 days and 3 nights before disappearing. The 80,000 plus sea beasts also stayed at the bottom of the sea for 3 days and 3 nights, not daring to make any movements. Finally, the heaven and earth anomaly gradually disappeared, and the bottom of the sea returned to peace and darkness. At this moment, Yun Yao had successfully broken through to the God-Emperor realm. She returned to the distorted spacetime and continued to cultivate in seclusion. Although she had already broken through to the God Emperor realm and condensed a Taoist rhyme, she still needed to take advantage of the opportunity. She absorbed the blessings and power bestowed by the heavenly Tao, further strengthening her divine Tao foundation and increasing her strength. After she entered the distorted spacetime, Jiku left the distorted spacetime and appeared in the cave in the rock wall. She had long comprehended the contents of the eternal heavenly book, and her strength had been strengthened to the limit. She had also tried twice in the distorted spacetime, but she had not been able to break through to the God Emperor realm. Yun Yao's success in breaking through to the God Emperor realm made her realize the problem. Therefore she had to complete her breakthrough in the cave in the rock wall like Yun Yao. She sat cross-legged in the cave and sensed the protection of the Emperor-level array formation. She cultivated in peace and began to break through to the God Emperor realm. As for the scene outside the Emperor-level divine array, she did not observe it, nor did she care. After Yun Yao returned to the distorted spacetime, she did not talk to Ji Tianxing and went into seclusion to cultivate again. She did not pay attention to what was happening outside. There were about 90,000 sea beasts near the trench. After the worldly anomaly ended, all the sea beasts regained their mobility without the suppression of the heavenly might. They gathered in the trench, waiting for the Emperor-level divine object to break through the rock wall and shine. However, the 90,000 sea beasts waited for a long time. Many of them even accumulated their divine power, ready to snatch the divine object at any time. However, the divine object did not appear. The rock wall was also quiet as if nothing had happened. How can this be? There was such a big commotion just now. Why is there no sound at all? Where are the treasures? Where are the Emperor-level divine objects? Did they disappear? Countless sea beasts had the same thought as they searched in all directions, full of confusion. Even the sea beasts closest to the rock wall released their divine senses again and used all kinds of divine abilities to investigate the situation inside the rock wall. However, the result was the same as before. The rock wall was protected by an invisible force, and no matter how they investigated, it was useless. Just as the sea beasts were discussing, some sea beasts discovered that the divine power of heaven and earth around them was flowing faster again. Vast and mighty divine power of heaven and earth gathered from all directions and rushed toward the dark trench like a river. As the divine power of heaven and earth around them became denser, colorful rays of light began to appear in the dark sea, and they became denser and denser. Half a day later, the divine power of heaven and earth within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles was drawn and gathered into the dark trench. Thus, the previous scene appeared again. With the dark trench as the center, the five-colored divine light filled the area within a radius of tens of thousands of miles. It was like a dazzling sun. The vast and mighty divine power of heaven and earth surged into the rock wall in the trench and disappeared without a trace. The 90,000 sea beasts were bathed in the divine light and bathed in the vast divine power of heaven and earth. Their strength began to increase rapidly again. Everything returned to how it was before. However, as the 90,000 sea beasts bathed in the divine light and cultivated and increased their strength, they were still discussing the strange phenomenon. What's going on? There was clearly a strange phenomenon, and the heavenly axiom sent down its might. Why is the divine object still not appearing? It's strange. Not only is the divine object not appearing, but it is also devouring the divine power of heaven and earth. Could there be more than one emperor-level divine object hidden in the rock wall? That's very likely. It could also be that the grade of the divine object is too high. One strange phenomenon is not enough to make it appear. It has to happen again. Are you serious? Is there such a thing? Chapter 4658. Although the godly item had not been born for a long time, the 90,000 sea beasts were still brooding. However, they could not detect the situation in the rock wall and had no way to actively find the godly item. Helplessly, all the sea beasts could only stay around the sea beasts and silently cultivate while bathing in the five-colored holy light. Anyway, after the godly item was born, only one or two lucky ones would be able to obtain it. The rest of the sea beasts were destined to be foils. Therefore, they could stay here for a few more days to absorb more five-colored holy light and increase their strength. This was considered a good gain. Thinking of this, the sea beasts felt much more relaxed. The electric eel and bony fish had been very distressed. Seeing more and more sea beasts gathering near the trench, they could only hope that the two lords would arrive as soon as possible. On the other side, Xianbing and Zidian stayed in the nest and cultivated peacefully. They originally thought that after 20 years of the Shangqing Temple's invasion, the next few hundred years would be peaceful. However, 2 messages from the Black Rock region broke the rare peace and alerted the 2 of them. After receiving the messages, the 2 of them gathered together and began to discuss countermeasures. Why is it the Black Rock region again? What godly item is born? In my opinion, it's most likely Long Tian's doing. That can't be right. It's been 20 years and he still hasn't left the Black Rock region? No matter how serious his injuries are, 20 years of recuperation in the Black Rock region should be enough for him to recover and move freely. Could it be that he still wants to stay in the Black Rock region and only leave after his injuries have healed? No matter whether the commotion in the Black Rock region was caused by him or not, the commotion now is very big and has alarmed millions of people. There are already tens of thousands of people rushing to the center of the Black Rock region and gathering near the trench. With so many people gathered together, it's too easy for something to happen. Long Tian is a god emperor powerhouse and also a foreign race. We still can't figure out his nature. If those people are blind and offend him, wouldn't it be a big problem? Don't hesitate, we have to hurry over and find a way to disperse them. That's right. We have to take precautions. If we wait until something happens to solve it, I'm afraid it will be too late. Just like that, Xianbing and Zidian discussed for a while, and then made a decisive decision to rush to the Black Rock region immediately. In order to reach the Black Rock region as soon as possible, the 2 of them didn't even bring any guards. Another 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. Jiku was cultivating within the stone walls, working hard to break through to the God Emperor realm. The divine power of heaven and earth within a radius of 800,000 miles was constantly converging towards the trench, forming a divine light region within a radius of 50,000 miles. In this area, the number of sea beasts that were bathing in the divine light and cultivating had already reached 150,000. The mountains and valleys around the trench were filled by the sea beasts. Almost every few thousand meters, there would be 1 or 2 huge sea beasts cultivating diligently. The nests and training grounds of the electric eels and bonefish had changed owners a long time ago. The 2 of them calmed down completely. They were no longer angry or anxious. Like the other sea beasts, they quietly absorbed the 5-colored divine light and tried their best to improve their strength. This was because the 2 suzerains were rushing over as quickly as they could after receiving their messages. Moreover, Xianbing and Zidian were very concerned about this matter. While they were rushing over, they didn't forget to send messages to ask about the latest developments. The only thing the electric eels and bonefish could do was report truthfully. Of course, from another perspective, this incident in the Black Rock region was actually beneficial to the 2 of them. After all, only the 2 of them knew that there might be a god emperor of a foreign race hiding in the depths of the trench. The 2 suzerains, Xianbing and Zidian, had also been contacting the 2 of them to ask about the situation. This meant that they were useful and could be of help to the 2 suzerains. If nothing unexpected happened, the 2 suzerains would give them some rewards after this incident was resolved. If they were lucky enough, the 2 suzerains might take a fancy to them and bring them back as guards. In that case, the 2 of them could be considered to have made a meteoric rise. The 10 days were about to end and the 11th day was about to arrive. At this moment, 2 dazzling beams of divine light sped over from afar. They were 2 gigantic figures. They passed through the 5-colored divine light that covered the sky and the sun and headed straight for the trench. Before the 2 sea beasts reached the trench, the majestic aura belonging to the God Emperor had already covered a radius of tens of thousands of miles. The hundreds of thousands of sea beasts that were cultivating in the area of divine light were almost all awakened. They all raised their heads to look at the 2 figures. Although most of the sea beasts hadn't seen the 2 suzerains with their own eyes, they could sense the aura of the 2 suzerains. They had already guessed the identities of the 2 sea beasts when they sensed the powerful aura of the 2 sea beasts. The electric eels and bonefish were still the fastest to react. They hurriedly bowed to the 2 gigantic sea beasts and shouted loudly, "Greetings to Lord Xianbing and Lord Zidian." With the 2 of them taking the lead, the rest of the sea beasts followed suit. They all bowed and paid their respects. The 2 gigantic sea beasts were Xianbing and Zidian. The 2 of them flew over the trench and stopped to look down at the dense group of sea beasts below them. Along the way, they saw that the hundreds of thousands of sea beasts were bathing in the divine light and cultivating peacefully. They were slightly relieved when they saw that there were no disturbances or conflicts. After the sea beasts paid their respects, Xianbing and Zidian summoned the electric eels and bonefish in front of them to ask about the recent situation. After learning that there were no abnormal movements in the trench and that the sea beasts were very quiet without any conflicts, Xianbing and Zidian were finally relieved. Then the two of them ordered all the sea beasts to retreat tens of thousands of miles and wait for further orders. If the sea beasts retreated tens of thousands of miles, they would no longer be able to bathe in the five-colored divine light. Even if they were tens of thousands of miles away, there would still be a huge amount of divine power flowing, but the effect would be greatly reduced. When the order was given, the hundreds of thousands of sea beasts were very shocked, conflicted, and hesitant. None of the sea beasts were willing to leave the trench and retreat tens of thousands of miles away. However, this was an order from the two lords, and none of the sea beasts dared to disobey it. The sea beasts had not been educated, but the concept of bloodline suppression and hierarchy was very prominent. If the sea beasts did not obey the order, the two lords could kill all of them in a fit of anger. Even if the news spread out of the Black Rock region and reached the ears of hundreds of millions of sea beasts, none of them would sympathize with the sea beasts who were killed. In addition, all the sea beasts guessed that there was an emperor-level divine object or treasure hidden in the trench, but none of them could open the rock wall to find the divine object or treasure. Perhaps only the two lords would be able to solve the mystery and allow the divine item to appear in the world. Therefore, the hundreds of thousands of sea beasts retreated tens of thousands of miles away in an orderly manner despite their reluctance. 2 hours later, with the trench as the center, the area within tens of thousands of miles was empty. Apart from the two lords, only the electric eels and bonefish remained. Only then did Xianbing and Zidian enter the trench to personally examine the rock wall. Chapter 46-59. Are you sure it's this rock wall? Xianbing pointed at a dark brown rock wall in the depths of the trench and asked the electric eel and bony fish. It's here. The electric eel nodded without hesitation. The bony fish explained, we're not the only ones who have tried. Over the past 20 days at least tens of thousands of sea beasts have tried. But no one could break the rock wall and they couldn't see what's inside. After confirming the area, Xianbing and Zidian didn't hesitate anymore. They released their divine senses and used their divine abilities to spy on the rock wall. In the end, their divine senses were blocked by an invisible force, and they couldn't see what was inside the rock wall. However, they were different from ordinary sea beasts. Those godly king realm sea beasts only knew that there was a powerful force blocking them from probing, but they didn't know what was going on. However, Xianbing and Zidian were experienced and knowledgeable. They immediately confirmed that it was an emperor-level divine formation. Zhou Xian. He must be the one who set up the formation. He hasn't left yet. As this thought flashed through their minds, Xianbing and Zidian retracted their divine senses at the same time and looked at each other. With their tacit understanding, they didn't need to speak at all to know that they were thinking the same thing. Seeing that the two lords were silent, but their eyes and aura were somewhat solemn, the electric eel and the bonefish observed their expressions and guessed the answer. My lords, what's inside the rock wall? It can't be some heaven and earth treasure, right? Since there were no other sea beasts around, the electric eel and bony fish thought that they had done a good job. They plucked up their courage and asked. Xianbing and Purple Lightning ignored the two of them. They were discussing how to deal with this matter through telepathy. Since it's a formation, it has nothing to do with the heaven and earth treasure. Must be that guy. It's been 20 years. Why hasn't he left yet? It's fine if he doesn't leave, but he even caused such a big commotion and attracted so many people here. Isn't he causing trouble? If we knew that he was such a troublemaker, we wouldn't have left him here to heal. We should have chased him away. This time more than 100,000 people were gathered here. Fortunately, nothing happened. No matter what, we have to ask him to leave this time. We can't let him stay any longer. As they discussed, Xianbing and Zidian quickly came to a consensus. They had to get Xian to leave no matter what. However, looking at the surrounding divine light, Xian should be cultivating in seclusion or recuperating from his injuries. At this time, Xianbing and Zidian did not want to disturb him, so they could only wait patiently. If he forcefully awakened Xian, it was very likely that he would infuriate Xian, and in the end he would still be asking for trouble. Anyway, the electric eel and the bony fish had said that the divine light that filled the sky had lasted for 12 days, and then it had ushered in a vision of heaven and earth. The heaven and earth anomaly would last for 3 days before dissipating. After that, there would be half a day of calm. Xianbing and Zidian calculated that the divine light had already lasted for 10 days. In another 2 days, the heavenly vision would appear. When the mysterious phenomena disappeared, it would be time for Long Tian to enter closed-door cultivation. He only had about half a day. Xianbing and Zidian decided to wait. The electric eel and bony fish could only suppress their doubts and wait patiently. Although the two suzerains did not answer their questions, they were not stupid. However, they were not stupid. They could guess the answer from the reactions of the two lords. There were definitely no treasures in the rock wall. It should be the god emperor of the alien race. Although the two of them were mentally prepared, when they realized the answer, they could not help but feel disappointed. Of course, the two of them were insignificant. Did not matter what they thought. Just like that, 3 days passed by in silence. During these 3 days, Xianbing Zidian, the electric eel, and the bony fish bathed in the 5-colored divine light while waiting, silently absorbing god power. They originally thought that the heaven and earth anomaly would appear in 2 days. In the end, they waited for 3 days before the 5-colored divine light disappeared. In the sky above the chaos sea, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. There were also crimson clouds that were as red as fire, as well as divine and dazzling golden light. A muffled rumbling sound echoed in the chaos sea. The invisible heavenly Tao's divine might descended and enveloped a radius of 50,000 kilometers. The electric eel and the bony fish had already seen the heaven and earth anomaly once and been shocked and intimidated by the heavenly Tao's divine might. However, when the heaven and earth anomaly appeared again, they were still attracted by the gorgeous scene and were intimidated by the terrifying heavenly might. Under the envelopment of the heavenly might, Xianbing and Zidian lowered their heads slightly and stood quietly in the trench to express their respect for the heavenly Tao. The electric eel and the bony fish's performance was a little unbearable. They were so intimidated by the heavenly might that they crawled in the trench, trembling and not daring to act rashly. However, this was a normal reaction. The hundreds of thousands of sea beasts had also retreated 50,000 kilometers away in advance and could not feel the mighty heavenly might. If they were near the trench and were enveloped by the heavenly might, the situation would definitely not be good. Xianbing and Zidian waited quietly, silently observing the formation, scale and power of the heaven and earth anomaly. However, after watching for a while, they gradually realized that something was wrong. What is Long Tian doing? Even if his injuries have healed, it shouldn't be like this, right? That's right. I've never heard of anyone who can cause a heaven and earth anomaly and trigger such a powerful heavenly might. In my opinion, only a peak godly king who has broken through to the god emperor realm can cause such a commotion, right? What you said makes sense, but the problem is, Long Tian has long been a god emperor. Forget it. It's useless for us to guess here. Let's wait for him to finish healing and ask him personally. The soul-stirring heaven and earth anomaly lasted for 3 days before dissipating. When the wind, fire, lightning and invisible heavenly might dissipated, the chaos sea returned to darkness and calm. Compared to the heaven and earth anomaly that was triggered when Yunyao broke through to the god emperor realm, the heaven and earth anomaly this time lasted for the same time and was not much different in scale. All in all, Jiku's divine Tao foundation, strength and cultivation prospects would not be much worse than Yunyao's in the future. In the cave in the rock wall, Jiku successfully condensed her first Taoist rhyme and successfully reached the God Emperor realm. She also returned to the distorted space-time contentedly and continued to cultivate in seclusion to strengthen her foundation. At this time, Ji Tianxing finally ended his seclusion. He carefully observed Yun Yao and Jiku's situation. Seeing that the two of them had successfully advanced to the God Emperor realm without any hidden dangers or problems, he left the distorted space-time with peace of mind. After returning to the cave, he put away the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda. Then he planned to put away the Emperor-level divine formation and leave the cave. Next he would leave the Chaos Sea and return to land. However, just as he was about to put away the Emperor-level divine formation, his divine consciousness sensed 4 auras above the trench. He was not unfamiliar with those 4 auras. 2 of them were God Emperor's auras. They were Xianbing and Zidian. Didn't those 2 leave many years ago? Why are they back? The same question popped up in Ji Tianxing's mind. Chapter 4660. Swoosh. A divine light flashed. The handsome Ji Tianxing, dressed in a white robe, flew out from the cliff. He flew above the trench and stood 10,000 feet away from Xianbing and Zidian, sizing them up calmly. Didn't you two leave a long time ago? Why are you back after 20 years? Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked Xianbing and Zidian with a faint smile on his face. Seeing his half-smile, Xianbing and Zidian felt a headache coming on. They had a premonition that this guy was up to no good and was probably up to no good again. Xianbing said angrily, "Long Tian, you're the one who did it. Why are you still asking the obvious?" Violet Lightning chimed in, "Don't play dumb with us. You've caused such a huge commotion, the five-colored divine light and the phenomenon of heaven and earth. Wasn't it all to force us to come find you?" Ji Tianxing was stunned and a trace of confusion flashed across his eyes. He really didn't understand why Xianbing and Zidian had returned after 20 years. However, after Zidian's reminder, he immediately guessed the reason. It must be because Yao Yao and Ku absorbed too much divine power when they broke through to the God Emperor level and triggered the divine power torrent. When they broke through to the God Emperor level, they triggered the heaven and earth phenomenon that covered a radius of 1,000,000 miles. If that's really the case, then it must have alarmed half of the Black Rock region and attracted Xianbing and Zidian. While these thoughts flashed through his mind, Ji Tianxing secretly released his divine sense and extended it in all directions. The area within a radius of 100,000 miles was empty except for Xianbing, Zidian, electric eels and bony fish. However, at the bottom of the chaotic sea, a dense group of sea beasts had gathered. Ji Tianxing scanned the area with his divine sense and roughly calculated that there were more than 100,000 sea beasts. This just so happened to confirm his guess. Therefore, the smile on his face became even more playful. He asked Xianbing and Zidian, "Then what do you want from me?" Xianbing and Zidian looked at each other. The same thought flashed through their minds at the same time. It was clearly this guy who forced us to come here. Why is he questioning us now? Without any hesitation, the two of them immediately used their soul consciousness to secretly discuss how to solve the problem. This guy is asking the obvious. He's definitely up to no good. Exactly. Look at how treacherous his smile is. He must be up to something. We can't fall for his trick. Let's just beat him at his own game and send him away today. It's time for him to leave our territory. Otherwise, he'll cause even more trouble. Within 2 breaths, Xianbing and Zidian had finished their discussion. Therefore, Zidian said to Ji Tianxing, "We came to find you. Naturally, we calculated that your injuries have already healed." As it spoke, it subconsciously released its soul consciousness to check on Ji Tianxing's condition. In the end, it was shocked to find that not only had his injuries healed and recovered to his peak state, his strength had also reached the middle stage of the God Emperor. In other words, in the past 20 years, not only had he healed his injuries, but he had also condensed a Taoist rhyme. Zidian was stunned. The latter half of the sentence was stuck in its throat. Could not say anything. Xianbing also found the problem. She opened her eyes wide and couldn't believe it. Only the electric eel and the bonefish were too weak to see any clues. "How did you do it?" Zidian was so shocked that it could not help but ask this question. Xianbing also looked at Ji Tianxing with a burning gaze. It asked anxiously, 20 years. It's only been 20 years. How did you do it? It and Zidian had cultivated in the Chaos Sea for close to 80,000 years, but they were only at the middle stage of the God Emperor. In order to condense a Taoist rhyme, it usually took them more than 10,000 years. However, Ji Tianxing only used 20 years. How terrifying was this? At this moment, Xianbing and Zidian dismissed the idea of chasing Ji Tianxing away. They only wanted to get to the bottom of it. If they could figure out how Ji Tianxing quickly condensed a Taoist rhyme, they could also quickly increase their strength. Ji Tianxing said with a smile, "What's so surprising about increasing one cultivation level in 20 years? I'm not afraid to tell you the truth. I've only been 200 years old since I was born." In fact, his words were half true. In terms of time in the outside world, he was indeed only around 200 years old. However, in reality, he had spent most of his time cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime. The flow of time in the distorted spacetime was 50 times faster than the outside world. If one counted carefully, he should have cultivated for more than 5,000 years. Even so, it was an unprecedented legend to go from a mortal to a god emperor in 5,000 years. 200 years old. The middle stage of the god emperor. Xian Bing and Zidian were stunned on the spot. Their eyes widened and their bodies seemed to be petrified. 200 years might be the time for them to take a nap and enter seclusion. However, the other party had become the middle stage of the god emperor in 200 years. This was simply too absurd. No matter what, Xian Bing and Zidian refused to believe it. Nonsense. I don't believe it. There can't be such a monster in this world. After Xian Bing and Zidian woke up, they hurriedly shook their heads and denied it. They refused to accept this fact. As for the electric eel and bony fish, they had been shocked to the point of numbness. They had lost the ability to think and speak. Ji Tianxing was still smiling. He said calmly, It's not only you who don't believe it. All the god kings and god emperors in this world won't believe it. There's no other way. There's only one person chosen by the heavens. If you don't have exceptional talent, how can you be chosen by the heavens? He said it casually, but it dealt a heavy blow to Xian Bing and Zidian's confidence. They were both envious and mad. I can't be bothered to listen to your nonsense. Even if you're the chosen one, even if your strength increases rapidly, so what? That's right. How you cultivate has nothing to do with us. We're here today to send you off. Your injuries have healed and your strength has increased. It's time to leave the Black Rock region, right? Xian Bing and Zidian, who had regained their senses, were even more vigilant and wary of Ji Tianxing. They had made up their minds. They could not believe Ji Tianxing's words. They had to send him off personally. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said with a playful smile, During this trip to the Chaos Sea, I realized that the Chaos Sea is the most suitable place for cultivation. After I cultivate in seclusion at the bottom of the sea for more than 20 years, I can increase my cultivation by another level. It's a pity that you don't welcome me. Since that's the case, I can only take my leave and discuss with Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin. I'm sure they'll be willing to let me stay if I give them some pointers. After saying that, Ji Tianxing cupped his hands and bowed to Xian Bing and Zidian. He turned around and flew away. Seeing him leave so confidently and swiftly, Xian Bing and Zidian were stunned again. They looked at each other. Chapter 46-61. Long Tian, wait. Long Tian, please wait. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was really about to leave, Xian Bing and Zidian panicked. They hurriedly shouted and chased after him. Although they were a little wary of Ji Tianxing just now, they were afraid that he would come up with some scheme. But now it seemed that this guy was really going to leave. Xian Bing and Zidian did not care about any schemes. They could only make Ji Tianxing stay first. After all, they also wanted to get Ji Tianxing's guidance and know how Ji Tianxing advanced so quickly. This kind of secret that could move all the God Emperor could not be taken advantage of by Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. If they let such a good opportunity slip away, Xian Bing and Zidian would definitely regret it for the rest of their lives. In fact, Ji Tianxing had already made up his mind. He was going to take advantage of Xian Bing and Zidian. Anyway, he had the initiative. Turning around to leave was half true and half false. If Xian Bing and Zidian did not chase after him, he would leave and return to land. Since they had caught up, he could do some things next. Long Tian, stop. Ji Tianxing slowed down. Xian Bing and Zidian sped up and caught up to him, stopping him. Thus, Ji Tianxing stopped and looked at Xian Bing and Zidian with a playful smile. You are not interested in the secret of my rapid increase in strength, but you want to stop me. It seems that you don't want Lan Long and Yu Bingxin to receive my guidance. I thought that you were allies and had a good relationship. Xian Bing and Zidian were a little embarrassed. They hurriedly explained, you misunderstood. We have a good relationship with Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. We trust each other very much. Long Tian, we will not beat around the bush. We will be direct with you. We want to know how you increased your strength so quickly. Is there some secret in the Chaos Sea that we haven't discovered? Of course, we guessed that you wouldn't teach us for free. If you have any conditions or requests, just say them. Xian Bing and Zidian were smart. They knew that they were no match for Ji Tianxing when it came to scheming. Therefore, they decided to go straight to the point. Ji Tianxing stopped smiling and looked at the two of them with a serious expression. He asked, are you serious? I advise you to think carefully. Don't be rash. Xian Bing and Zidian looked at each other and discussed with each other through telepathy. Then both of them nodded in confirmation. We are sincerely seeking your guidance. Just state your conditions. Of course we've thought about it, but we'll have to wait for you to state your conditions before we can decide whether to agree or not. Seeing that the other party was taking the bait step by step, Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "All right, since you guys are so straightforward, I won't hide it anymore. To tell you the truth, the mineral resources in the Chaos Sea are very rich. Many rare and hard-to-find Emperor-level materials can be found in the Chaos Sea. I'm thinking of gathering Emperor-level materials to refine 1 or 2 Emperor-level divine artifacts. However, I don't want to waste too much time searching for refining materials in the Chaos Sea. I'm sure you don't want to see me wandering around. Since that's the case, why don't we cooperate? Help me gather the corresponding Emperor-level materials and I'll answer your questions. Isn't this fair?" Xian Bing and Zidian fell silent. They were a little hesitant and secretly discussed with each other through telepathy. Ji Tianqing was right. The Chaos Sea did contain an endless amount of cultivation resources and ores. There were many precious Emperor-level materials in the Chaos Sea. To Xian Bing and Zidian, it was not too difficult to help Ji Tianqing gather some Emperor-level materials. The two of them had already stored some. If they mobilized their subordinates to search for them, they should be able to gather them in just 10 years. In comparison, Ji Tianqing's secret to rapidly increasing his strength was even more important and mysterious. The two of them used Emperor-level materials to exchange for Ji Tianqing's secret to rapidly increasing his strength. No matter how one looked at it, it was a profit. After all, there was still a very important question that had to be considered. Xian Bing and Zidian were not proficient in array formations, nor were they good at refining. Even if they could gather many Emperor-level materials, they could not turn them into Emperor-level divine artifacts. It was impossible for them to trade with the experts of the 4 temples. Therefore, in the past tens of thousands of years, they could only excavate some naturally formed Emperor-level divine artifacts. Even though they had the vast Chaos Sea and could gather many Emperor-level materials, they were still very pitiful. They only had 1 or 2 Emperor-level divine artifacts at most. After considering these problems, Xian Bing and Zidian no longer hesitated and decisively agreed to Ji Tianqing. "All right, we agree to your conditions. Isn't it just helping you gather Emperor-level materials? No problem. However, we can't have more than 2 materials for divine artifacts. Don't play any tricks with us." Even at this moment, Xian Bing and Zidian did not let down their guard against Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing chuckled and said, "All right. Then it's a deal. We can't go back on our word." "We won't go back on our word." Xian Bing and Zidian replied in unison. Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and added, "We have no proof and no one can restrain us. Therefore, it's safer for us to swear an oath to the heavenly Tao. We can also restrain each other." Xian Bing and Zidian also had the same intention and nodded in agreement. "That's good. Only then can we show our sincerity." In fact, the two of them were also afraid that Ji Tianqing would play some tricks. If they could swear an oath to the heavenly Tao, that would be the best. The sea beasts only believed in the heavenly Tao and Ji Tianqing was the chosen one. There was no reason for him to go against the heavenly Tao. This restrained both sides and made them more confident in each other's oaths. After that, Ji Tianqing took the lead to swear an oath to the heavenly Tao. Xian Bing and Zidian followed closely behind. They only changed the name and words of what he said, and the oath to the heavenly Tao was established. After both sides swore an oath to the heavenly Tao, the oath took effect. Earth-shattering thunder sounded in the sky above the Chaos Sea, and lightning, wind, and fire appeared. After the phenomenon caused by the oath to the heavenly Tao ended, the agreement between both sides officially took effect. At this moment, Xian Bing and Zidian took out their communication jade slips and tokens and said, "Long Tian, our agreement has taken effect. Now you can tell us the secret of your rapid increase in strength. As long as you tell us this secret, we will immediately give the order for all our people to gather Emperor-level refining materials with all their might." Of course, when they said that, Xian Bing and Zidian had already released their divine senses and condensed a domain that enveloped the two of them and Ji Tianqing. As for the electric eel and bone fish, they were excluded from the domain and could not hear their conversation. Seeing Xian Bing and Zidian's serious and cautious expressions, Ji Tianqing smiled and slowly spoke. "The secret of my rapid advancement is very simple." Chapter 4662. When Ji Tianxing opened his mouth to speak, Xian Bing and Zidian's hearts were also in their throats. Both of them listened attentively and expectantly, not wanting to miss a single word. However, Ji Tianxing's answer and subsequent words stunned both of them on the spot. I am the chosen one. My aptitude, talent, and comprehension are the best in the world. I am unparalleled. In addition, I have a divine artifact. The flow of time in the internal space is dozens of times faster than the outside world. With these 2 points, I can reach the realm of God Emperor in the shortest time possible. This is unprecedented. Ji Tianxing's face was full of smiles as he spoke. Xian Bing and Zidian were completely dumbfounded after hearing this. That's it. That's it. Both of them were stunned as they stared at Ji Tianxing in bewilderment. It was obvious that they could not accept this result. Ji Tianxing spread out his hands and said with a sincere face, "That's all. You guys are overthinking it." Admittedly, there were many factors in the process of his rapid increase in strength. For example, opportunities, perseverance, a calm and collected way of doing things, strategizing, and various other reasons. However, these reasons were secondary and were not enough to be discussed in detail. In his opinion, the existence of the Jutian 10 Absolutes Tower, his own talent and comprehension were the most important factors. However, Xian Bing and Zidian could not accept this answer and became anxious. You might as well not have said anything. We thought you were going to reveal some secret. The time artifact you mentioned is easy to understand. Unfortunately, we don't have it. However, the talent and comprehension you mentioned are not something we can have just because we want to. In short, the 2 points you mentioned are not the answers we need at all. Ji Tianxing's face was full of regret. He sighed and said, "It can't be helped, but this is the truth. You don't have the time artifact and you don't have extraordinary talent and comprehension. I can't do anything about it. I only promised to tell you the reason, but I didn't promise that the answer would be something you would like. No matter what, I've already fulfilled my promise. Now it's your turn to fulfill your mission." This. Xian Bing and Zidian looked at each other. They were both angry and regretful. They were already very vigilant and guarded against Ji Tianxing, but they still fell into his trap. This answer made them feel a strong sense of malice and the feeling of being deceived. Long Tian, even though we've already sworn an oath to the heavenly Tao, you're clearly setting us up. We firmly disagree. Yes. You clearly said that you would guide us. Don't think that you can use this answer to deal with us. Ji Tianxing frowned and retorted, "When did I promise to guide you? We are both at the middle level of God Emperor, and the two of you seem to be a bit stronger than this emperor. How can this emperor guide you?" Xian Bing and Zidian thought about it carefully and realized that this was indeed the case. Ji Tianxing had only said that he would guide Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. When he had sworn an oath to the heavenly Tao, he had not said that he would guide them. No matter how they looked at it, Ji Tianxing had not violated his oath. However, Xian Bing and Zidian were not happy. They felt very sullen and regretful. Long Tian, no matter how you quibble, it's a fact that you set us up. Although we're not as scheming as you are, don't think that we're easy to bully. As they spoke, Xian Bing and Zidian's eyes flashed with murderous intent. Ji Tianxing also stopped smiling and asked seriously, "What? You want to violate your oath to the heavenly Tao? You want to attack this emperor?" Xian Bing and Zidian remained silent and refused to answer. In fact, they were very angry and had the thought of attacking. Even though the electric eel and bonefish had told them that Ji Tianxing was the chosen one and was protected by the heavenly Tao, they still wanted to take the risk and give it a try. However, they only thought about it. In the end, reason prevailed over impulse and they decided to continue bargaining with Ji Tianxing. "Fine, Long Tian, you win. But do you think we'll just admit defeat? We can fulfill our promise and help you gather the materials to refine an emperor-level artifact. But we didn't set a time limit. Whether we use tens of thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years to gather the materials you want, it won't be considered a violation of our oath." "That's right. We won't violate our oath to the heavenly Tao and help you gather the materials, but we'll drag this out forever until the day we die of old age." At this point in the negotiation, both sides were temporarily in a deadlock that was difficult to resolve. Ji Tianxing's goal was to gather the materials to refine an emperor-level artifact as soon as possible. Bullying Xian Bing and Zidian and forcing them to violate their oath to the heavenly Tao wouldn't do him any good. If they really went back on their word and dragged it out for tens of thousands of years, their agreement would be meaningless. Therefore, after some consideration, Ji Tianqing decided to give them a way out. It's meaningless for us to continue like this. Since it's a cooperation, of course, it should be mutually beneficial. How about this? I can give you a few pointers on your cultivation problems. Of course, I don't have a thorough understanding of the cultivation methods of the sea beasts. If my pointers aren't good enough, you shouldn't be too demanding. Seeing that Ji Tianqing had taken the initiative to give in, Xianbing and Zidian's attitudes eased a lot, and their anger gradually dissipated. At least you said something fair. Cooperation is a matter of mutual benefit. Otherwise, why would we make this deal? Long Tian, we appreciate that you're willing to give in, but this is not enough. After all, whether you can help us or not is still unknown. But we can also promise you that within 100 years, we'll help you gather 2 sets of materials for Imperial-level divine artifacts. 100 years. Ji Tianqing frowned. Obviously, he couldn't accept this promise. That's too long. I hope you can reduce it to 10 years. 10 years? Impossible. Xianbing continued to bargain with Ji Tianqing. Unless you agree to one more condition, there's no need to talk. Seeing that Xianbing's attitude was so tough, Ji Tianqing could only try to ask, what condition? Zidian's eyes flashed with a hint of a smile. You have to teach us the method of refining Imperial-level divine artifacts and ensure that we succeed in refining Imperial-level divine artifacts. Obviously, Xianbing and Zidian had their own plans and ambitions. They could gather a lot of Imperial-level divine artifacts. If they could master the method of refining, they could refine even more Imperial-level divine artifacts. At that time, they would have a greater chance of winning against the experts of the Shangqing Temple. Ji Tianqing weighed the pros and cons for a moment. He thought to himself, the Sea Beast clan guards the Chaos Sea and the Evernight Sea. If they can refine more Imperial-level divine artifacts and strengthen their own forces, they might be able to compete with the Shangqing Temple. In the future, they might be of help to me. Therefore, he nodded decisively and agreed. Okay, I can teach you the method of refining, but you have to promise that you'll gather the materials I need within 5 years. Deal. Xianbing and Zidian nodded hurriedly. Chapter 4663. Both sides had reached an agreement and there was no more dispute. Of course, the happiest ones were Xianbing and Zidian. They hurriedly asked Ji Tianqing what refining materials he needed. Ji Tianqing had long been thinking about what refining materials he needed to upgrade the god-slaying battleship and Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda to Emperor-level divine artifacts. Of these 2 divine artifacts, one was his spoils of war and the other was from the Dragon Realm. It was a relic of the ancient divine bird, the Phoenix. Both were Emperor-level divine artifacts. Apart from the Sword of Burial of Heaven, these 2 divine artifacts were the ones he used most often. If he could upgrade them to Emperor-level divine artifacts, many people would benefit. Ji Tianqing had already calculated that 24 sets of Emperor-level refining materials were needed to upgrade the god-slaying battleship and Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda. He handed the jade slip with the 24 sets of materials to Xianbing. After reading it, Xianbing said confidently, although you asked for a lot of refining materials, we will fulfill our promise and help you gather them within 5 years. After all, we already have 6 of these materials in our hands. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said, in that case, give the order and let your people gather them as soon as possible. Zidian hurriedly took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to the generals under its command, asking them to pass on its and Xianbing's orders. It took time for orders to be passed down through the layers. It would take 2 or 3 days for Xianbing and Zidian's orders to reach the various territories and for the people to take action. After Zidian gave the order, it said to Ji Tianqing, we've done what we should do. Now it's your turn to fulfill your promise. Ji Tianqing nodded and asked, should I guide you in your cultivation first or teach you the refining method first? And are you sure you want to do it here? His meaning was obvious. This was the Black Rock region, not Xianbing and Zidian's nest. Moreover, there were hundreds of thousands of sea beasts gathered around. No matter how he looked at it, it was not suitable to teach here. Xianbing and Zidian understood his meaning and hurriedly explained, of course not here. You have to leave the Black Rock region with us and go to our cave residence. Ordinary sea beasts' residences were called nests. However, Xianbing and Zidian were lords and god emperor powerhouses. Their residences were indeed built caves. Swish. After the two sides reached a consensus, Xianbing waved his hand, domain. The electric eel and bony fish knew that they were discussing important matters just now. Now that the domain had been lifted, the discussion should be over. But their status was low and they were not qualified to ask about the result. Meanwhile, Violet Lightning glanced at the two of them and said, "Out of consideration for your loyalty and intelligence, I'll allow the two of you to join our guard group." Although the electric eel and the bony fish had long expected that they would be rewarded for their contributions, they were still very likely to be rewarded. However, when they heard Zidian's words, they were still very excited. They hurriedly nodded and thanked him again. Xianbing and Zidian led the way and flew southeast with Ji Tianxing. Electric eel and bony fishes followed closely behind. In order not to expose Ji Tianxing's existence and to prevent the surrounding hundreds of thousands of sea beasts from discussing, Xianbing and Zidian released their divine power and condensed a huge ball of five-colored divine light. This ball of five-colored divine light enveloped everyone and traveled through the chaos sea, flying over the heads of tens of thousands of sea beasts. Many sea beasts knew that the two lords were leaving and bowed. With the five-colored divine light blocking them, the sea beasts could not see the two lords' faces clearly, nor could they see Ji Tianxing's figure. Ji Tianxing followed Xianbing and Zidian and flew in the chaos sea for 14 days before arriving at Xianbing and Zidian's cave abode. The place where they lived was near a huge eye of the sea. That sea eye was tens of thousands of miles wide and bottomless. No one knew where it led. While constantly devouring the chaos sea, the sea eye also absorbed the divine power of heaven and earth within a radius of 1,000,000 miles and gathered near the sea eye. Xianbing and Zidian were near the sea eye. At the bottom of the dark sea, hundreds of miles deep, they dug a cave abode in a huge underwater mountain range. The cave abode was in the dark brown belly of the mountain. On the surface, it looked like a cave with a radius of 100,000 feet. In fact, there was a universe inside. It had completely opened up an alternate space. The alternate space was hundreds of thousands of miles wide. Not only were there mountains and water, but there were also mountains, forests, birds and beasts. More than half of the divine power of heaven and earth gathered in the sea eye was absorbed by this cave abode. Therefore, the divine power of heaven and earth in Xianbing and Zidian's cave abode was extremely abundant. It was most suitable for cultivation. Ji Tianxing followed the two of them into the cave abode. He looked around and did not make any comments. However, Xianbing and Zidian took the initiative to introduce the situation in the cave abode to him. They seemed to be rather pleased and proud of themselves. After all, the two of them had indeed spent a lot of effort and time to build such a cave abode. Unfortunately, they were not good at setting up array formations. In Ji Tianxing's opinion, the layout and arrangements in the cave abode could only be considered superficial and entry-level. However, Xianbing and Zidian were somewhat proud. He could not be bothered to expose them and only smiled without saying anything. After wandering around the cave abode, Xianbing and Zidian arranged a residence for Ji Tianxing. Even in this alternate dimension, Xianbing and Zidian did not build a palace or a courtyard. They still dug caves in the mountains to live in. The two of them were very enthusiastic about arranging a cave for Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing refused. He would rather choose a mountain peak with more divine power of heaven and earth and build a palace on the peak of the mountain. With his current level of strength, it was not difficult for him to create a palace out of thin air. In just half a day he cast a spell and created a magnificent palace. After seeing it, Xianbing and Zidian did not think it was very gorgeous or beautiful. They were only curious about the various array formations that Ji Tianxing cast. It could not be helped. The sea beasts were still used to living in caves. They were not interested in palaces and courtyards. After Ji Tianxing settled down, the electric eel and bony fish also joined the guards as they wished. In this alternate dimension, thousands of sea beasts in the Divine King realm were stationed. They were all the guards of Xianbing and Zidian. The two of them originally wanted to arrange a group of guards for Ji Tianxing to help him protect the palace. However, Ji Tianxing declined. Next, he would stay in this cave abode for 5 years and wait for the sea beasts to help him gather the materials for refining equipment. During this period, he also had to fulfill his promise and guide Xianbing and Zidian in their cultivation. He also had to teach them how to refine equipment. Ji Tianxing originally planned to teach them how to refine equipment first. However, after communicating with them, he realized that Xianbing and Zidian knew very little about refining equipment and were not proficient in arrays. It was too difficult to teach them how to refine equipment directly. Therefore he could only guide Xianbing and Zidian in their cultivation. He also gave them some experience in setting up arrays and refining equipment. After all, he had taught the sea beasts in the unknown land before. Now he was very familiar with guiding 2 sea beasts in the God Emperor realm. Chapter 46-64. Back when Ji Tianxing was in an unknown land, it was relatively simple for him to teach the beast race how to set up arrays and refine artifacts. After all, the beast race had taken the initiative to learn the refining and array formation techniques of the desolate race and the divine halls 1,000 years ago. They had already laid down the corresponding foundation, so they learned it faster. As for Xianbing and Zidian, they had always been in the Chaos Sea. Whenever they saw the experts of the 4 divine halls, they would only fight them. It was impossible for them to learn how to refine artifacts and set up arrays. Without the corresponding foundation, Ji Tianxing had to spend more time and effort to teach them bit by bit. Xianbing and Zidian temporarily put aside other matters and focused on learning with Ji Tianxing. This learning session lasted for 2 whole months. Thankfully, Xianbing and Zidian were God Emperor experts. Their talent and perception were outstanding. Ji Tianxing was able to help them lay down a certain foundation in just 2 months. After having a foundation, he began to teach Xianbing and Zidian how to refine artifacts and set up arrays. Xianbing and Zidian were very diligent in learning. After 2 months of interaction, they had also put down their God Emperor status and humbly sought advice from Ji Tianxing. However, it was an unchangeable fact that their learning progress was indeed inferior to Sky-Splitting and Loathing, whom Ji Tianxing had taught back then. Xianbing and Zidian had heard Ji Tianxing mention this before. They felt a little ashamed and worked even harder and more seriously. In view of Xianbing and Zidian's talent and perception, Ji Tianxing decided to teach them 2 mystic techniques. One was an array formation technique and the other was an artifact refinement technique. These 2 mystic techniques were more basic and practical among emperor-level mystic techniques. They were relatively easier to learn. In this way, he was confident that he would be able to teach Xianbing and Zidian within 3 to 5 years. Furthermore, in order to make it easier for them to learn the Xianbing and Zidian, not only did he answer their questions, but he also personally demonstrated the 2 techniques and explained them in detail. Xianbing and Zidian could also tell that Ji Tianxing was not being perfunctory. He was teaching them diligently. At first, they were worried about this problem. After all, Ji Tianxing was too cunning. However, after a few months of interaction, they completely dispelled their concerns. While they trusted Ji Tianxing even more, they had also issued orders to urge their elite subordinates to speed up the collection of refining materials. Time flew by and the years flew by. Unknowingly, 3 years had passed. During this period, the elite sea beasts would escort 1 or 2 sets of refining materials to Xianbing and Zidian almost every 1 or 2 months. After Xianbing and Zidian checked the materials and confirmed that there were no problems, they would directly hand them over to Ji Tianxing. After 3 years of accumulation, all the refining materials needed to upgrade the god-slaying battleship had been collected. Only 8 sets of materials needed to upgrade the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower were missing. In these 3 years, under Ji Tianxing's careful guidance, Xianbing and Zidian finally learned the 2 mystic techniques. Next, they would begin to cultivate the 2 mystic techniques in seclusion. Once they had mastered them, they would be able to set up formations and refine emperor-level divine artifacts. Ji Tianxing also needed them to cultivate in seclusion so that he would have time to refine artifacts. Therefore, after the 2 sides arranged the follow-up matters, Xianbing and Zidian returned to their respective caves and cultivated in seclusion. Ji Tianxing also left the palace he lived in and prepared to find a place to refine artifacts. This was because he wanted to refine the god-slaying battleship and upgrade it to an emperor-level divine artifact. The Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower was currently a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact and could not withstand the power of an emperor-level divine artifact. In the secret chamber of the palace, there was no corresponding formation set up and could not help him. Therefore, Ji Tianxing did not enter the distorted space-time and left the palace. He searched around the cave and finally found a mountain range as a place to refine artifacts. The terrain of this mountain range was rather strange. There were 3 high peaks around it and they were connected by mountain ranges. In the middle was a basin with a radius of 100 miles. Such a terrain was like a natural brazier, and the divine power of heaven and earth was very abundant. Ji Tianxing used his array formation skills here and took out tens of billions of divine stones and cultivation resources to set up a formation on the natural brazier. He sat cross-legged high in the sky and waved his hand, sending out billions of divine stones and many king-level divine artifacts, which landed on the 3 surrounding peaks. Then he formed a divine art with both hands and released thousands of divine light rays that landed on the surrounding peaks and quickly formed the foundation of the formation. 5 days later, the foundation of the formation was completed, and he began to weave the network of the formation. 10 days later, the first formation was completed. A 5-colored light shield with a radius of 100 miles enveloped the entire, natural brazier. Next, Ji Tianxing spent another half a month to set up 2 emperor-level divine formations. The 3 emperor-level divine formations combined had multiple effects, turning the natural brazier into a huge furnace of heaven and earth. When the 3 divine formations were activated, the furnace of heaven and earth within a radius of 100 miles burned with raging emperor-level divine fire that contained terrifying power. At this time, Ji Tianxing took out the god-slaying battleship and took out a dozen sets of forging materials, preparing to forge a divine artifact. The 50,000 soldiers left in the god-slaying battleship had already been led by Long to the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower. The first, second, third, and fourth levels of the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower were equivalent to small worlds that could accommodate billions of living beings. The 50,000 soldiers were temporarily settled on the second level of the Divine Pagoda. Zhou Ji Tianxing held the palm-sized god-slaying battleship in his hand and threw it into the furnace of heaven and earth. With a flash of light, the god-slaying battleship expanded at a speed visible to the naked eye. When it landed in the furnace of heaven and earth and hovered in mid-air, it had already expanded to a length of 10,000 feet. It was a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact, so it could be big or small. It could shrink to the size of a speck of dust and expand to a radius of 100,000 miles. It could be retracted and expanded freely. And a 10,000-foot-long battleship was the most suitable state for Ji Tianxing to forge it. Ji Tianxing sat cross-legged on the furnace of heaven and earth and seriously and attentively cast a divine technique to forge a divine artifact. He was immersed in the forging process and had no distractions, forgetting the passage of time. Unknowingly, half a year had passed. The god-slaying battleship had long been smelted into a large ball of sparkling and translucent liquid. All the impurities had been removed, and the material had been further strengthened. Then Ji Tianxing began to throw in the emperor-grade materials according to a fixed order and timing, every 10 days to half a month. Another half a year passed and all the materials were thrown into the furnace of heaven and earth. After being smelted by the furnace of heaven and earth, all the materials were purified and turned into a sparkling and translucent metallic liquid that merged with the god-slaying battleship. Although Ji Tianxing was forging to upgrade the god-slaying battleship this time. In fact, this was equivalent to forging and refining from scratch. Next, he had to pull himself together and be even more serious and focused. He had to forge a brand new battleship from the 5-colored liquid that was tens of thousands of feet in radius. Chapter 4665. In the previous year, Ji Tianxing had refined the god-slaying battleship and the materials to perfectly fuse them together. But this was just the preparatory work. It was also the prerequisite to creating an emperor-level battleship. The next year was the most exhausting period for him. Not only did he have to remodel the god-slaying battleship, but he also had to design the exterior and interior of the battleship. Even though he was already at the middle stage of the god-emperor realm, a year of continuous high-intensity casting spells and artifact refinement left him feeling mentally exhausted. Fortunately, this was not too difficult for him. A year later, the artifact refinement was completed, and the god-slaying battleship was successfully completed. Zhou. Under Ji Tianxing's control, the 3 emperor-level arrays gradually stopped operating, and the heaven and earth furnace also gradually extinguished. The god-slaying battleship hovering in midair also gradually revealed its true appearance after the flames subsided. When Ji Tianxing controlled it with his mind and made it fly out of the heaven and earth furnace into the sky, he could clearly see its true appearance. The brand new god-slaying battleship was 100,000 feet long and had a streamlined appearance. It was dark gold in color and surrounded by a layer of restrained divine light. It was like a divine dragon soaring in the 9 heavens, like a shark riding the wind and breaking the waves. It was even more like a magnificent boat, a divine warship. Its appearance was not exaggerated or extravagant, but its interior was very spacious. There were more than 1,000 secret rooms, each of which was 10,000 feet wide and could accommodate many immortals and immortals. There were a total of 9 Emperor-level divine arrays inside and outside the battleship. 9,999 Emperor-level divine arrays had all kinds of effects. At the very least, the 50,000 soldiers could absorb more divine power from heaven and earth while living in the god-slaying battleship. Their strength would also increase faster. In addition, the god-slaying battleship had been successfully upgraded to an Emperor-level divine battleship. Its defense, power, and speed had all increased by several times. In the future, Ji Tianxing could travel on this god-slaying battleship. It was both convenient and comfortable. Just as he was carefully sizing up and admiring the brand-new god-slaying battleship, a deafening sound came from the sky, and thousands of lightning bolts flashed. Boom, boom, boom. Accompanied by the formless heavenly might, it enveloped the area from the sky. Instantly, the entire cave abode was enveloped by the divine might of the heavenly Tao. Clouds, flames, and golden lotuses danced in the sky. Mountains and rivers could be vaguely seen. Without a doubt, this was a natural phenomenon that occurred when an Emperor-level artifact appeared. At the same time, this also represented the heavenly Tao's recognition of this Emperor-level divine artifact. Ji Tianxing raised his head to look at the phenomenon in the sky. He silently felt the divine might of the heavenly Tao, and a smile appeared on his face. All these years, as the number of appearances of the heavenly Tao's divine might increased, he became increasingly certain of one thing. Shua. Shua. Right at this moment in the sky 100,000 miles away, 2 beams of divine light were flying towards Ji Tianxing at extreme speed. The sudden appearance of the heaven and earth phenomenon alarmed the entire cave. Thousands of sea beasts were intimidated by the divine might of the heavenly Tao. Their hearts were filled with fear as they trembled. Only Xianbing and Zidian dared to fly under the cover of the heavenly Tao. When they were awakened by the heavenly anomaly, their first reaction was that it was definitely caused by Long Tian. Therefore, they immediately searched for Long Tian's aura and went to find him to clarify things. In the blink of an eye, Xianbing and Zidian arrived at the scene. They were still tens of thousands of miles away, but they could already see the heaven and earth furnace, the 10,000-foot-long battleship in the sky, and Ji Tianxing who was standing in the air. Xianbing and Zidian were still unsure of what that huge array was used for. However, they saw the dark gold god-slaying battleship floating in the sky, exuding the unique divine might of an Emperor-level divine artifact. They immediately understood that it was the birth of that Emperor-level divine artifact that had caused the heavenly anomaly, and that huge array was most likely the divine furnace, used to refine the battleship. Chua. In a flash of divine light, Xianbing and Zidian flew in front of Ji Tianxing. As soon as they stopped, they couldn't wait to ask, Long Tian, you've already refined an Emperor-level divine artifact? This heavenly anomaly was caused by that Emperor-level divine artifact of yours, right? When they asked these questions, their voices were a little excited and their eyes were full of envy. Not only were they envious of other god emperors who had Emperor-level divine artifacts, but they were even more envious of people like Ji Tianxing, who could refine an Emperor-level divine artifact in 2 years as long as he had the materials. What did this mean? As long as he had enough refining materials, Ji Tianxing would be able to continuously refine even more Emperor-grade divine artifacts. Imagine if the two of them had 7 or 8 Emperor-level divine artifacts to arm themselves. If they met the temple masters of the Shangqing Temple, they wouldn't need to be afraid at all. Ji Tianxing didn't say much. He just nodded and waved his hand to put away the god-slaying battleship. Xianbing and Zidian looked on eagerly as the god-slaying battleship shrunk from 10,000 feet long to the size of a palm, then turned into a speck of dust and was absorbed into Ji Tianxing's body. Next, Ji Tianxing looked at the two of them with a scrutinizing gaze and asked, You've been in seclusion for 2 years. How's your cultivation? Xianbing and Zidian hurriedly nodded and answered with some pride, A month ago, I mastered those 2 divine abilities and came out of seclusion a long time ago. I mastered them half a month ago, and I'm trying to set up an Emperor-level divine array. Ji Tianxing nodded and said a few words of encouragement. Very good. You've mastered those 2 divine abilities and secret techniques. In the future you'll have to practice and experiment more. Don't think that just because you've mastered them you're only at the beginner level at best. When you reach the stage of major success and master the 2 divine abilities and mystic techniques, you will be able to create more divine abilities and mystic techniques on your own. This will be very helpful for you when you're setting up formations and refining tools in the future. It might even be beneficial for you to improve your cultivation base. Xianbing and Zidian nodded again to show that they were enlightened. They promised that they would practice diligently in the future and wouldn't slack off. After all, they knew that the 5-year deadline was up and Ji Tianxing was going to leave soon. Ji Tianxing asked again, "How's the collection of the remaining materials for refining tools coming along?" Xianbing and Zidian each took out an ancient treasure box and handed it to him. "As early as half a year ago we finished collecting the rest of the materials for refining tools. After we came out of seclusion, we went to your residence to look for you. Seeing that you weren't there, we didn't want to disturb you. Thinking that the deadline was coming to an end, we decided to wait until now and hand them to you in person." Ji Tianxing took the treasure box and inspected it. After confirming that there were no problems with the dozen or so sets of materials, he put them away into his spatial ring. At this moment Xianbing took the initiative to ask, "Long Tian, we've fulfilled our promise to each other and the 5-year deadline is up. Are you going to leave?" Chapter 4666. 5 years ago Xianbing and Zidian were still very wary of Ji Tianxing and even a little disgusted. However, 5 years later their mentality had unknowingly changed. Before the 2 sides reached an agreement, Ji Tianxing had indeed cheated them. However, after the agreement was reached, Ji Tianxing did not play any more tricks. Instead he taught them sincerely and helped them greatly. They had only commanded the elite sea beasts under their command to search for more than 20 emperor-level materials from the Chaos Sea. Yet Ji Tianxing had paid so much. Now that they thought about it, they felt a little ashamed and were very grateful to Ji Tianxing. If Ji Tianxing left just like that, they would actually be a little reluctant. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and pointed at the heaven and earth furnace not far away. He smiled. "I spent a lot of time and cultivation resources to create that heaven and earth furnace to refine an emperor-level divine artifact. I plan to stay for another 2 years and refine another emperor-level divine artifact before leaving." Upon hearing this, Xianbing and Zidian were relieved. The 2 of them subconsciously turned to look at the heaven and earth furnace, observing it curiously and expectantly. "Isn't that an emperor-level array? Why is it called the heaven and earth furnace?" Under normal circumstances, refining artifacts requires a divine furnace or a divine cauldron. How can you refine an emperor-level divine artifact by setting up a few large arrays between the mountains and rivers? "Zidian, have you forgotten that Long Tian taught us before? Refining artifacts does indeed use a cauldron, but that's under normal circumstances. However, under rare circumstances, we can also use the power of heaven and earth to modify the array formation. We can also form a heaven and earth furnace to refine some divine artifacts." "Yes, I forgot about that. But isn't this too magical? I clearly remember that there were only 3 mountain peaks and a basin full of trees." Hee. That's why Long Tian said that even if we master those 2 mystical abilities, we've only just learned them. The Tao of array formation and artifact refinement is truly broad and profound. There are too many things we need to learn. Ji Tianxing didn't explain anything. On the other hand, Xianbing and Zidian were observing the heaven and earth furnace and discussing it enthusiastically. The 2 of them flew a circle around the heaven and earth furnace, observing it while discussing it. They were both excited and a little expectant. When they were further away from Ji Tianxing, the 2 of them secretly discussed something through telepathy. According to Long Tian, this heaven and earth furnace has 3 emperor-grade divine formations and many king-grade divine formations. It has cost him a lot of time and cultivation resources. Do you think he will tear down this heaven and earth furnace after he leaves? Xianbing and Zidian both knew that the heaven and earth furnace was built on 3 mountain peaks and hundreds of thousands of miles of heaven and earth. Even if Ji Tianxing left, it was impossible for him to take it away. At most he could only dismantle it. "I don't think so. We've treated him quite well, so he shouldn't be so petty. Besides, we can compensate him with some cultivation resources and treasures." "That's right. This way this heaven and earth furnace can be left to us. When the time comes, the 2 of us can study it properly. If we can study this heaven and earth furnace thoroughly, Our array formation and artifact refinement skills will definitely improve greatly. Of course. Moreover, we don't have to waste time and effort to create a furnace for artifact refinement. With this heaven and earth furnace, we can also refine Emperor-grade divine artifacts. If we want to refine Emperor-grade divine artifacts, we also have to refine a large number of King-grade divine artifacts to equip our elite warriors. Yes. We have already mastered the artifact refinement method, and there are endless materials in the Chaos Sea. We can refine many divine artifacts. Perhaps in a few thousand years, we can let every citizen use divine artifacts. Xian Bing and Zidian chatted further and further away. The topic gradually shifted to the point of looking forward to the future. When they talked about the next step of the plan, they had already circled around the heaven and earth furnace and returned to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing saw that the two of them still wanted to continue talking, so he said, "The heaven and earth avatar might last for 2 to 3 days before it ends. Go and comfort those few thousand guards first. In a while, I will activate the heaven and earth furnace again and refine a second Emperor-grade divine artifact. If you have nothing to do, you can come here to observe and learn. I can also teach you the method to control the heaven and earth furnace." Upon hearing Ji Tianxing's words, Xian Bing and Zidian were stunned for a moment. Then they revealed excited smiles. They were just discussing whether Ji Tianxing would dismantle the heaven and earth furnace when he left. Ji Tianxing wanted them to observe and learn, and he also wanted to teach them the method to control the heaven and earth furnace. This was undoubtedly telling them that the heaven and earth furnace would not be dismantled. In the future, when he left, he would leave the heaven and earth furnace for them to use. Although Xian Bing and Zidian had already guessed that this would be the result, they could only truly feel at ease when they heard Ji Tianxing admit it with their own ears. "Long Tian, thank you so much. We will go and comfort those guards now. Wait for us." After saying these 2 sentences, Xian Bing and Zidian turned and left. They rushed back to the vicinity of the cave as fast as lightning. The 2 of them were anxious to observe and learn Ji Tianxing's weapon refinement. They did not have time to waste with those guards. Even though the few thousand guards were trembling in fear and did not dare to move, they only found a dozen or so guard commanders and explained the situation to them. They told them to tell all the guards not to worry or be afraid. This was only a heaven and earth avatar caused by the birth of an Emperor-grade divine artifact. At most, it would disappear in 2 to 3 days. After explaining clearly, Xian Bing and Zidian ordered all the guards to continue with what they were doing. After saying these words, the 2 of them rushed back to the vicinity of the heaven and earth furnace as fast as lightning. At the same time, Ji Tianxing was ready. Once Xian Bing and Zidian arrived, he began to cast the spell to activate the heaven and earth furnace. As he cast the spell to activate the large formation, he explained to Xian Bing and Zidian. Xian Bing and Zidian observed very carefully. They memorized all the words that Ji Tianxing said and all the spells that he cast. This was because they knew that this was a rare opportunity. The sooner they learned and grasped the trick, the easier it would be for them to use the heaven and earth furnace in the future. Originally, Ji Tianxing only needed a few hours to cast the spell to activate the heaven and earth furnace. However, in order to explain in detail to Xian Bing and Zidian, he spent an entire day. Fortunately, the effect was very obvious. Xian Bing and Zidian memorized every word and every spell he cast. They also understood how to control it. After activating the heaven and earth furnace, the furnace still needed to operate for 3 days to reach the most suitable temperature. Ji Tianxing began to prepare for the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower. He had everyone in the tower temporarily moved to the god-slaying battleship. 3 days later, when everything was ready, he officially started the weapon refinement. Chapter 46-67. When Ji Tianxing officially cast spells to refine artifacts, he could no longer take care of Xian Bing and Zidian and slow down the progress of casting spells. He followed the normal procedure. Only when he was free would he give pointers to Xian Bing and Zidian. As for how much they could comprehend and to what extent they could learn, that would depend on their own talent and comprehension. Time passed silently. Ji Tianxing focused on refining artifacts. Xian Bing and Zidian observed and learned seriously. No one came to disturb them. The biggest advantage of Xian Bing and Zidian's cave abode was that it was quiet. Moreover, the Sea Beast clan usually did not have many matters to deal with. If Ji Tianxing had to choose whether to cultivate in a mystic realm in a certain temple or in seclusion in this cave abode, he would choose to stay here. Of course, there was another important reason why he chose this place. This was the Chaos Sea. It was rich in resources and the divine power of heaven and earth was abundant. Most importantly, it was very close to the door of heavenly Tao. The process of refining the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda was roughly the same as refining the god-slaying battleship. There was not much difference. The process was not suitable to be described in detail. In short, Ji Tianxing had spent more effort and energy to refine the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda. In order to make the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda reach the arc level and become stronger while maintaining its original functions, he had spent a lot of effort. The refining techniques, array formation methods, and ideas used were something that Xianbing and Zidian could not understand at this stage. Previously, he had spent 2 years refining the god-slaying battleship into an emperor-level divine artifact. It took him 2.5 years to upgrade the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda. When he finished refining, the flames in the heaven and earth furnace were extinguished. The 10,000 feet tall 9-story divine pagoda once again emitted a mysterious black light. At this moment, the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda had completed its transformation and successfully advanced to Thearch level. The appearance of the divine pagoda did not change much, and neither did the number of floors. However, the internal space of each floor had been greatly improved. There were also a few levels of space that had been modified by Ji Tianxing to be more suitable for living and cultivation. For example, the first, second, third, and fourth levels of the divine pagoda contained some ruins and secrets left behind by the ancient demon race. Back then, before Ji Tianxing became a god king, studying those things was still useful. Now that he was the supreme god emperor, the statues of the 7 ancestors of the monster clan and the secret techniques passed down by the monster clan no longer had much meaning to him. He had transformed the 4 layers of space into a world filled with divine power, creating a new world. In this way, the 4 layers of space could hold billions or even tens of billions of living beings. Of course, his main purpose was to house the 50,000 soldiers. Among the 50,000 soldiers, there were many Divine Lord Realm experts. They still needed a stable environment to cultivate before they could reach the Divine King realm. Ji Tianxing believed that when those God Monarch realm warriors moved into the world he had modified, they would receive great benefits. They would have a high chance of breaking through to the God King realm. The successful promotion of the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda to the Emperor level naturally caused a phenomenon. In the sky above the cave abode, dull thunder sounded again. Dazzling lightning flashed and scenes of wind, fire, thunder and golden lotuses appeared. Of course, there was also the descent of the heavenly Tao's divine power that enveloped the entire cave abode. With their previous experience, the thousands of sea beast guards immediately knew that this was another phenomenon caused by the birth of an emperor-level divine artifact. Although they were trembling under the heavenly Tao's divine power, they were no longer confused and panicked. Their minds were more calm. Near the heaven and earth furnace, the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda slowly rose and flew into the sky. Xianbing and Zidian were filled with excitement. They had witnessed the birth of the divine pagoda with their own eyes and felt a sense of participation and pride. After all, they had observed and learned for 2.5 years and watched Ji Tianxing refine this emperor-level divine artifact step by step. These 2 years of observation and learning had greatly improved them. It was also the rarest learning opportunity in their lives. With the accumulation of experience this time, they would not take many detours on the path of artifact refinement in the future. After a long while, Ji Tianxing controlled the divine pagoda with his mind and retracted it into his body. Zhoosh! The divine pagoda that was 10,000 feet tall instantly shrank into a black dot the size of a sesame seed and entered his palm. Xianbing and Zidian still wanted more, but they could only retract their reluctant gazes. When they looked at Ji Tianxing again, their gazes became complicated. There was some respect and some reluctance. If possible, they hoped that Ji Tianxing could stay in the cave abode for a long time. However, they knew that was impossible. Long Tian, thank you for your guidance and help over the past few years. We will remember your friendship. Xianbing looked at Ji Tianxing seriously and said in a serious tone. Zidian also nodded and said firmly, although you are about to leave the Chaos Sea and we don't know how many years it will be before we meet again, we have already acknowledged you. We believe in you and are willing to be friends with you. In the future, when you come to the Chaos Sea again, we will also provide you with help within a certain range. After hearing their words, Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. All right, with your words, My efforts over the past few years have not been in vain. If there is nothing else, I will take my leave this time. I will leave this heaven and earth furnace to you. I believe the two of you have learned how to open and control it, right? Xian Bing hurriedly nodded and said, "We will remember it. We will not forget." Zidian also added a few words and took out a ball of divine light. It wrapped the treasure box and sent it to Ji Tianxing. Long Tian, you spent a lot of effort and resources to set up this heaven and earth furnace. Now that you are leaving, you are giving it to us and even teaching us how to use it. We can only give you some resources and treasures as compensation. Please accept it. If not, we will feel uneasy. Clearly, Zidian had already prepared a gift as compensation for Ji Tianxing. Xian Bing hurriedly nodded and said with a smile, "Long Tian, Zidian and I have already discussed this matter. It is also a token of our appreciation. Please accept it." Ji Tianxing looked at them and saw their sincere eyes. He swallowed the words of rejection that were at the tip of his tongue. Compared to the desolate race, the aquatic beasts were uneducated and sometimes appeared more ferocious and bloodthirsty. However, they were much simpler and purer. Perhaps he had used his actions to make Xian Bing and Zidian trust him and accept him. Or perhaps his identity as the chosen one gave him a natural advantage. It made it easier for him to gain the trust and closeness of the aquatic beasts. In short, Xian Bing and Zidian would be of help to him when he came to the Chaos Sea in the future. This would be very beneficial for his future actions and plans. Chapter 46-68. After accepting Xian Bing and Zidian's gifts, Ji Tianxing said goodbye to them. Xian Bing and Zidian sent him out of the underwater cave abode and said goodbye to each other in the darkness of the sea. Ji Tianxing took out the god-slaying battleship and drove it away. It was not until the battleship disappeared from Xian Bing and Zidian's divine senses that they turned around and returned to the cave abode. After entering the cave abode, they immediately rushed to the heaven and earth furnace. Their speed was extremely fast and they were very excited. Although the heaven and earth vision caused by the birth of an emperor-level artifact still shrouded the entire cave abode, they could not care less. From the moment they saw the heaven and earth furnace, they were very eager to control it and use it to refine emperor-level artifacts. In the past 2 years they had watched Ji Tianxing refine artifacts and learned how to control it, but they had never had the chance to use it and experiment. Now that Ji Tianxing had left, of course they rushed over to try to activate the heaven and earth furnace. As long as the heaven and earth furnace operated smoothly, they would use the refining methods they had learned before and begin to refine emperor-level artifacts. A few years ago, when many elite sea beasts were ordered to collect emperor-level materials for refining artifacts, not only did they help Ji Tianxing find materials, but they also collected a lot of materials for them. After a while, Xian Bing and Zidian returned to the heaven and earth furnace. The two of them could not wait to cast the technique and spent nearly 2 days to successfully activate the heaven and earth furnace. The first step was successful. The two of them were encouraged and became more excited. They quickly cast the technique to control the heaven and earth furnace and prepare to refine artifacts. In the process, the two of them also discussed telepathically. What kind of emperor-level artifact should they refine first? Should they refine a weapon first? Or should they refine a defensive artifact first? Or should they refine a cauldron? Of course, a weapon was the first choice. If they wanted to compete with the God Emperor of the Shangqing Temple, they needed a strong offensive and lethal weapon. However, a defensive artifact was also very important. Otherwise, they would not be able to defeat the Shangqing Temple's powerhouses. As for the cauldron, it seemed to be a necessity. They could use the heaven and earth furnace to refine emperor-level artifacts, but they could not use it to refine emperor-level artifacts. That was simply overkill. Only an emperor-level cauldron could quickly refine emperor-level artifacts in large batches and equip their guards and elite sea beasts. After thinking about it, Xian Bing and Purple Lightning decided to forge a weapon first. As long as the first emperor-grade artifact was successfully forged, they would have the experience of success. They would be more confident in forging other emperor-grade artifacts. The god-slaying battleship left the dark seabed and flew above the sea surface. The heaven and heavens heavens the heavens' heaven heavens heaven. He's. He. With this Emperor-class battleship he would be able to go anywhere he wanted on the planet of origin. No matter how dangerous the Chaos Sea was, no sea beast would dare to attack the god-slaying battleship. much less catch up to it. White Dragon piloted the warship as if it was piloting a super fortress. It was extremely safe. Of course, while he was satisfied with piloting the Emperor-level warship, he was also secretly encouraging himself to become a peak divine king as soon as possible. His master and 2 mistresses were already God Emperor-level experts. Even his junior brother and junior sister had caught up to him and become high god kings. With junior apprentice brother and junior apprentice sister's talent, they would definitely become peak divine kings in a few years. He could not fall behind his junior brothers and junior sisters. Otherwise he would lose face as a senior brother. Most importantly, he had to at least become a peak divine king before he could unleash the corresponding power of the god-slaying battleship. In the future, when Master encounters a strong enemy and fights with the enemy, he will be able to help. Zhi Tianxing entered the depths of the god-slaying battleship and entered a specially constructed secret room. He summoned the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and entered the distorted spacetime. The divine pagoda floated in the middle of the secret room. It was placed on top of a divine array and emitted a black glow. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, Zhi Tianxing appeared in the colorful distorted spacetime. After the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda was rebuilt and upgraded, the distorted spacetime had also expanded by several times. Unfortunately, time was one of the most difficult forces to control in the world. Even if he upgraded the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda to Emperor level, he would not be able to change the flow of time in the distorted spacetime. The flow of time here was still 50 times faster than the outside world. However, the divine power in the distorted spacetime was even more abundant. The bloody flame sacred tree's growth speed had increased. Everyone's cultivation efficiency in the distorted spacetime had also increased. Yun Yao, Jiku Pan-Ri God Emperor, and the others had also left the god-slaying battleship and returned to the distorted spacetime after the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda was completed. When Zhi Tianxing returned to the bloody flame sacred tree, everyone was sitting on dozens of cloud platforms around him. They were still focused on cultivating in seclusion. These more than 20 people were all Zhi Tianxing's friends and relatives. Although many of them did not know each other and did not communicate with each other, they were all cultivating diligently. However, all of them were working hard on their cultivation, trying their best to increase their strength. They also had the intention of secretly competing with each other. For example, Pan-Ri God Emperor Yun Yao and Jiku. Yun Yao and Jiku had long been used to and accepted the existence of Pan-Ri God Emperor. However, the 2 of them worked especially hard to cultivate. They wanted to catch up to Pan-Ri God Emperor as soon as possible and even surpass her in the future. Pan-Ri God Emperor also felt a great sense of crisis in her heart. It was very urgent. When Yun Yao and Jiku were still mortals, she was already the God Emperor. Now that more than 1,000 years had passed, she was only at the middle stage of the God Emperor realm, while Yun Yao and Jiku had already stepped into the God Emperor realm. If she did not work hard to cultivate, Yun Yao and Jiku would catch up to her before she could reach the upper stage of the God Emperor realm. At that time, not only would she not have any advantage, but she would also become a joke. Therefore, she had been comprehending the 600-word heavenly book that Zhi Tianxing had given her all these years. The contents of the heavenly book came from the Azura God Emperor. The main purpose of the heavenly book was to help people break through to the God Emperor realm. However, as the God Emperor, comprehending more of the heavenly book's contents would also help her improve her strength faster. On the other side, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, Bai Feng, Chao Qingyu, Yank and the others were also trying their best to break through to the peak of the God King realm. Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang did not want to compete with anyone. They only wanted to follow in their parents' footsteps and reach the God Emperor realm as soon as possible so that they could help their parents. However, Bai Feng, Chao Qingyu, Yank and the others were under immense pressure. They had no choice but to cultivate desperately. Back then, when Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang were still children, they were already God Kings. Now these 2 geniuses had actually caught up to them and even surpassed them. How could they endure this? It was useless to live thousands or tens of thousands of years more. Chapter 4669. Many of Zhi Tianxing's friends and family cultivated with all their might in the distorted spacetime. The 50,000 soldiers who had followed him were also settled in the first and second levels of the divine pagoda. Those 50,000 soldiers didn't dare to slack off either. They also cultivated with all their might, thinking of ways to increase their strength. When they entered the brand new divine pagoda and lived in the brand new world, they realized just how much Ji Tianqing had treated them. The place Ji Tianqing had prepared for them was not only rich in divine power, but also rich in resources. There were also many dangerous places and secret realms, and there were even checkpoints that Ji Tianqing had deliberately set up. Only those who passed the tests or were fated could obtain the treasures, divine abilities, secret arts and cultivation experiences he had left behind. As such, the 50,000 soldiers didn't dare to slack off. They all did their best to strengthen themselves, afraid that they would fail to live up to Ji Tianqing's expectations. Under such circumstances, Ji Tianqing's relatives, friends and subordinates could be said to be of one mind. Ji Tianqing circled around the blood-flamed sacred tree to check on everyone's situation. Seeing that everyone's cultivation was stable and that many people's strength was steadily increasing, he was relieved. Finally, he arrived at the cloud platform where the Xianxia God Emperor resided. It was a platform that looked like it had been condensed from white clouds. It had a radius of several hundred meters, but only the Xianxia God Emperor was sitting on it. Not only that, but the 10-odd cloud platforms around her were also empty. No one was sitting near her. In Ji Tianqing's view, perhaps everyone was afraid of her strength. After all, she was a middle-level God Emperor. The speed at which she absorbed the divine power of heaven and earth while cultivating in seclusion was simply too terrifying. If other god kings cultivated near her, not only would their absorption of divine power be affected, but their minds would also be suppressed by the aura of the God Emperor. Thus, it was understandable that everyone stayed away from her. But this was only Ji Tianqing's opinion. The Xianxia God Emperor might not necessarily think so. Even though the Xianxia God Emperor had her eyes closed and was seriously cultivating in seclusion. However, after Ji Tianqing stood in front of her for a while, she sensed him. She calmly ended her cultivation and opened her eyes. She glanced at Ji Tianqing and asked indifferently, "Why are you looking for me?" Seeing her reaction, Ji Tianqing understood. He smiled and said, "I know you're feeling uncomfortable, but it's hard for me to comfort you. After all, you might have wronged them. Everyone here is my family and friends. I can say with certainty that although we don't talk much, we are all of one mind and will never reject each other." The Prajna God Emperor was still expressionless. "I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you looking for me?" Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and said, "Of course I have something to discuss with you, but I don't want to see you in such a bad mood." After he finished speaking, he lowered his body and stared at Xianxia God Emperor, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm normal. I'm not in a bad mood." The Prajna God Emperor avoided his gaze and looked away. Ji Tianqing wanted to use the same trick again, but just as he reached out his hands, before he could touch the Prajna God Emperor's face, she retreated 3 zhang away and stared at him with vigilance. "Don't try this with me. I've been fooled once and I won't be fooled a second time." Ji Tianqing, who had suffered a setback, withdrew his hand without a trace and smiled embarrassedly. "Since you already have a grudge, I have to make things clear and dispel this misunderstanding." He didn't want to make things clear, but the Prajna God Emperor's reaction clearly showed that she was already upset. He could only say seriously, "After I reforged the divine pagoda, everyone returned to the distorted space-time and came to this sacred tree. You are like many people still sitting in your previous position. But some people left their previous positions and chose a more suitable place for their cultivation. But in this way the space beside you is empty. You are sitting here all alone and you feel isolated. You feel that they are rejecting you and not accepting you. You have even wondered if they are hostile to you. Am I right?" The Prajna God Emperor's expression didn't change and her eyes were still calm, but her mood fluctuated slightly. But she remained unmoved and said with the same cold tone, "You think too much. This emperor doesn't know them and we are not the same kind of people. It is reasonable for them to stay away from this emperor." "What are you saying?" Ji Tianqing frowned and said in a serious tone, "I've said it before. The people here are all my family and friends. They are, but I am not." The Prajna God Emperor's tone and eyes were as indifferent. Ji Tianqing was silent for a moment, thinking about how to solve this problem. He knew that the Prajna God Emperor had always been a very cold and proud woman with a very strong self-esteem. She wouldn't lower herself and compromise for the sake of being friends with others and blending into other people's circles. The two of them were silent for a while. Ji Tianqing said with a low and serious tone, "Actually, I don't need to say the reason. You understand it in your heart. You are the God Emperor and they are only divine kings. They are bound to be affected if they sit next to you and cultivate. That is why they changed positions and you kept your distance. Not only them but even Scarlet Afterglow, your disciple, is sitting on the other side, sitting alone in a corner. The Prajna God Emperor remained silent and didn't say anything. But in her heart the grudge was gradually disappearing. This was because everyone's attitude towards her was only secondary. What she cared about the most was Ji Tianqing's attitude, whether he cared about her, whether he noticed her emotional fluctuations. Obviously she had received the care and attention that she longed for. Ji Tianqing continued, Scarlet Afterglow sitting alone in a corner is her own choice. It's not that anyone is isolating her. After all, her personality is like this and she still rejects everyone. She still needs some time to get used to it. As for you, there is no need to be angry with everyone. After all, you are the God Emperor, recognized as the first goddess of the God realm. If you are still so childish in the future, it will tarnish your glorious image. Hearing this, the Prajna God Emperor rolled her eyes at him, snorted coldly and didn't say anything. Humph. Seeing her reaction, Ji Tianqing knew that her anger had subsided. He smiled and said, Okay, this matter ends here. Since there is an empty space next to you, I will sit next to you and cultivate. In any case, you can't affect me. No. As soon as he finished speaking, the Prajna God Emperor frowned and firmly objected. Ji Tianqing's smile became mocking and he pretended to be domineering and said, You say no and I don't? This is my territory. If I want it, I have it. You can't resist, you can only accept it. This sentence was obviously ambiguous, and the Prajna God Emperor's eyes were somewhat evasive. Her charming face was slightly red and she could only lightly spit at him. Shameless. Chapter 46-70. The Pan-Ruo God Emperor, who was as cold as an iceberg on the outside and cold and arrogant on the inside, rarely looked so shy. Perhaps only Ji Tianqing could do it. Fortunately, he did not take advantage of the victory to pursue and only looked at the Pan-Ruo God Emperor silently. A moment later, after she had calmed down, Ji Tianqing said seriously, All right, there's something I need to ask you. The Pan-Ruo God Emperor returned to normal. Her eyes were clear and she said calmly, There's no need to ask. Just say what you want to ask. Ji Tianqing said, I will leave the Chaos Sea and return to land. Next, I will head to the territory of the next temple. From the map, it should be the Taiyu Shrine's territory. Do you still remember who came into contact with the Taiyu Shrine? The Pan-Ruo God Emperor replied without hesitation, It's Dao Xingyun. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and thought to himself, Among those God Emperors, Dao Xingyun is not much stronger than Pan-Ruo. He is relatively low-key and should be easy to deal with. With his current strength and methods, he was naturally confident in dealing with Dao Xingyun. Have you contacted them recently? What's the current situation of Dao Nebula? The Pan-Ruo God Emperor nodded slightly and said, Previously, when you came into contact with the Sea Beast race, before your two wives broke through to the God Emperor realm, I did contact them. The god of the underworld did not reply. I don't know how he is. Only Lu Jiayong and Dao Xingyun sent me a message. Dao Xingyun only told me that he had already joined the Taiyu Shrine and did not say anything else. As for Lu Jiayong, he absorbed living beings of various races in an unknown place and established a Nine-Yang temple. Ji Tianqing frowned after hearing this and analyzed in a low voice. From the reaction of the god of the underworld, he should be intending to leave your alliance and prepare to do it alone. As for Lu Jiayong, he actually absorbed living beings of various races and established the Nine-Yang temple. This is beyond my expectations. Although Dao Xingyun is ambitious, he is not as strong as the god of the underworld and the God Emperor. He joined the Taiyu Shrine should be a choice after weighing the pros and cons. It is very in line with his usual style. However, it's not a good thing for me that he has the backing of the Cosmos God Hall. Seeing Zhong Yu's serious expression, Bo Ri God Emperor showed an apologetic look and said, I know that the grudge of my life cannot be resolved. You must kill Lu Jiayong, Dao Xingyun and Yu Ming. I'm sorry I can't, God. All I can do is help you resist the other God Emperors such as the Temple Masters. Although the Pan-Ruo God Emperor was forced to form an alliance with Ji Tianqing to help him deal with the other four God Emperors. But she was once an ally of the four God Emperors, and together they studied and opened the chaotic fog of the Star of Origin. She had her own bottom line. Even if she betrayed the four God Emperors, she would not personally attack them. Perhaps in the eyes of others she had already betrayed the 4 god emperors. What else couldn't she do? But every strong person has their own principles and everyone should have their own bottom line. Regarding this, Ji Tianxing naturally understood and would not ask for anything. Well, I have been mentally prepared for this, you don't have to feel sorry. As for the current situation of Dao Xingyun, let's wait until we return to the mainland and find a way to investigate. As for the follow-up plan, it will depend on the situation of the Taiyu Shrine. After saying this, Ji Tianxing turned and left, preparing to sit on the cloud platform next to the Pan-Rua God Emperor to cultivate. Seeing this, the Pan-Rua God Emperor became anxious and hurriedly shouted, "Go away, you are not allowed to sit next to me." Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, "There are so many empty seats here, I can sit wherever I want, what can you do?" As he said this, he also wanted to sit down. The Pan-Rua God Emperor was angry and anxious. She glared at him and scolded him, "Damn it! Are you serious? Your wife and children as well as your relatives and friends are all watching over there, what are you doing sitting here? Do you want to kill me? Go away." Seeing that the Pan-Rua God Emperor was really anxious, Ji Tianxing stopped teasing her and said with a smile, "Well, it's not that I don't want to sit here, it's you who don't let me sit, I'm leaving." "Hurry up and leave," the Pan-Rua God Emperor hurriedly urged. She even turned her head guiltily to observe the reactions of Yun Yao, Ji Ku and the others. She was slightly relieved when she realized that Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others were focused on cultivating and did not notice anything. Ji Tianxing returned to his exclusive seat and threw away all distracting thoughts to focus on cultivating in seclusion. The White Dragon steered the god-slaying battleship and flew south in the Chaos Sea. It flew day and night for nearly a month. During this period, the god-slaying battleship crossed 2 regions. However, the overlords of the sea beasts in those 2 regions did not appear. As for the ordinary sea beasts, they had the thought of attacking the god-slaying battleship. However, those godly king realm sea beasts could not catch up to the god-slaying battleship, nor could they pose a threat to it. A month and 4 days later, the god-slaying battleship finally left the Chaos Sea and returned to land. Thanks to the White Dragon's control of the direction of the battleship, the god-slaying battleship flew southeast. When the battleship returned to land, theoretically speaking, it had already left the Shangqing Temple's sphere of influence. Unfortunately, the battleship flew in the sky for 3 days straight. There were still endless mountains and primeval forests below. There were no cities or villages. The White Dragon could not obtain any information and could not determine the approximate location. However, after carefully observing those mountains and forests, he could basically confirm that it was an unknown land. He took out a rough map of the planet of origin. After a detailed comparison, he determined the location of the battleship. That's right. This place was indeed not within the Shangqing Temple's sphere of influence. The surrounding 1 billion miles was an unknown land. It was northeast of the Shangqing Temple and northwest of the Taiyu Shrine. It was between the 2 temples. The god-slaying battleship continued to head southeast. After passing through this unknown land, it would enter the Taiyu Shrine's sphere of influence. Since the location was confirmed, the White Dragon did not hesitate anymore. He steered the god-slaying battleship forward at full speed. However, in the process of crossing the unknown land, the White Dragon observed that there were countless godly king realm beasts hiding in the mountains below. There were even many godly king realm birds and beasts that were chasing after the god-slaying battleship in groups, trying to surround and kill it. The White Dragon did not care about them at all. He controlled the divine array of the battleship and used the space jump trump card. Zhoosh! A white light flashed in the sky. The god-slaying battleship instantly tore open the sky and disappeared from the spot. In the next moment, the god-slaying battleship was wrapped in a layer of white light and appeared in the sky 100,000 miles away. It easily shook off those godly king realm beasts. Chapter 4671. The god-slaying battleship had shaken off those beasts. But when the battleship passed through the central region of the unknown land, it was locked onto by a powerful aura. It was an ancient beast as large as a mountain. It had the power of a god emperor and was the only lord of this unknown land. It had a ferocious appearance and was extremely powerful. It crossed countless mountains and forests as it charged toward the god-slaying battleship. The distance between the 2 sides quickly closed. Even Bai Long, who was inside the battleship, could clearly feel the intense pressure. That mountain-like beast swooped down from the sky. It waved its thick arms and smashed them toward the god-slaying battleship. 6 pitch-black swords of light shot out of its sharp pitch-black claws. They were unparalleled in sharpness and were unrivaled. At this critical moment, Bai Long decisively activated the god-slaying battleship's Emperor-level divine array and formed a dark golden barrier. Boom! Crack! The 6 black swords of light hit the dark golden barrier. A deafening boom echoed for hundreds of thousands of miles. The violent and devastating shockwaves spread out in all directions, destroying dozens of mountains and tens of thousands of miles of forest. Fortunately, the god-slaying battleship's defensive barrier was strong enough. Even though it was heavily damaged, it did not collapse. Moreover, the god-slaying battleship even used the powerful impact to accelerate forward for 30,000 miles, temporarily shaking off the ancient beast. Seeing that its attack had failed, the ancient giant beast roared angrily and dashed out like lightning again. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it pounced towards the deity-slaying battleship. Fortunately, it was a walking beast and not a flying bird. Speed was not its forte. Otherwise, it would quickly catch up to the god-slaying battleship. The first time it pounced, the white dragon was caught off guard, so it was hit. But now Bai Long was prepared. He activated the god-slaying battleship's multiple arrays and sped forward at full speed. The ancient beast could not catch up at all. Both sides sped through the sky. Every once in a while they would use teleportation techniques. Their speed was extremely fast. But the distance between the two sides was always about 30,000 miles. No matter how much power the ancient beast used, it was useless. 2 hours later, both sides had chased for tens of millions of miles. Not only did the ancient beast fail to catch up to the god-slaying battleship, but it also used up a large amount of divine power. Its speed began to decrease. It knew that it could not catch up to the god-slaying battleship. It had no choice but to give up. The god-slaying battleship's speed did not decrease at all. Soon it disappeared into the horizon. The ancient beast looked in the direction where the battleship had disappeared. It roared angrily before it turned and left. The white dragon finally heaved a sigh of relief after escaping from the ancient giant beast's pursuit. He controlled the god-slaying battleship's speed and speed of the battleship. Flying at full speed was indeed very fast, but the consumption of divine stones and cultivation resources was also very fast. After piloting the god-slaying battleship for a month, he had already found the most suitable spot. It would not consume too many godstone resources and it would not be too slow either. Then he recorded battleship's map. A god-slaying battleship. There was a map of the Star of Origin in the Jade Slip, which roughly marked the areas of influence of the 4 temples and the locations of many unknown places. Bai was God. God. A god emperor was Go, but slaying God was a god. The reason why he recorded the information was to complete the map. He believed that the map would be useful to his master when he traveled the planet of origin. After settling these matters, Bai Long steered the god-slaying battleship towards the southeast. 2 days later, the god-slaying battleship flew out of the unknown lands and arrived at the borders of the Taiyu Shrine. In the border region where the two factions met, there were no large numbers of beasts or desolate race members. It appeared rather peaceful. However, Bai Long believed that the desolate race members of the Taiyu Shrine would often venture into the unknown lands to search for treasures and hunt beasts. If not, the beasts and the ancient beast would not have attacked the battleship with murderous intent when he steered the god-slaying battleship through the unknown lands. After entering the Taiyu Shrine's territory, the god-slaying battleship flew for an entire day before Bai Long finally saw the desolate race. It was a small city. It was located on a winding mountain range. The city was built on the mountain range and appeared long and narrow. It spanned more than 100 miles from west to east. It could accommodate hundreds of thousands of desolate race members. Bai Long did not inform his master to prevent it from affecting his master's cultivation. He skillfully put away the god-slaying battleship and entered stealth mode as he quietly approached the city. The ancient city had experienced at least 10,000 years. Traces of the vicissitudes of time could be seen everywhere. Probably because it had not experienced war for 10,000 years, the small city was very peaceful. Even though there were guards patrolling the city gates and walls, there were not many of them. Furthermore, they were relaxed and did not have high vigilance. Bai Long spent some effort and means to successfully infiltrate the small city without being detected by anyone. After all, the small city did not have a god emperor overseeing it. The strongest people were only a few dozen high-level god kings. There were not even any peak god kings. Bai Long stealthily wandered around the small city, trying to gather information. Although the desolate race citizens in the small city rarely went out to see the outside world, there were still many of them. It was very difficult for them to obtain any special or important information from their conversations. However, after wandering around for 2 days, Bai Long managed to obtain some information that he needed. He had already confirmed that this was the Taiyu Shrine's territory. This small city was under the Taiyu Shrine's Baiyun Hall's sphere of influence. In the Baiyun Hall's territory, there were dozens of small cities like this as well as countless villages and towns. Unfortunately, most of the people in the small city had never been to the Baiyun Hall's headquarters. It was said that it was a very magnificent city. It was heavily guarded and had many strong people. Bai Long originally thought that the Baiyun Hall would spread some news or make some big move. After all, Dao Xingyun had already joined the Taiyu Shrine. The 4 great temples had been searching for the Chosen One, hoping that the Chosen One could help them solve the secret of the door of heavenly Dao. It was because of this that the Prajna God Emperor was chosen by the Kongming Temple and almost became the 6th Temple Master. The Shura God Emperor was also accepted into the Shangqing Temple and was escorted by 3,000 elite God Kings to explore the Chaos Sea. Bai Long thought that the reason why the Taiyu Shrine was willing to accept Dao Xingyun was most likely because of the Chosen One. In that case, the Taiyu Shrine would definitely bring Dao Xingyun to the Chaos Sea to explore the door of heavenly Dao. However, he did not hear any relevant information after asking around in the small city. After thinking about it, Bai Long felt that this small city was still too small, and the information was too limited. Even the headquarters of the Baiyun Hall might not be reliable. It was best to rush to the headquarters of the Taiyu Shrine to find out useful information. Chapter 4672. The White Dragon left the small city quietly. Tens of thousands of miles away from the city, he took out the god-slaying battleship and continued to fly southeast. He had already investigated the information he had gathered in the small city. The headquarters of the Taiyu Shrine was in an ancient mystic realm called the Taiyu Mystic Realm. That mystic realm was in the center of the shrine's territory, while the Baiyun Hall was in the northwest. The two were very far apart. No matter how fast the god-slaying battleship was, it would take at least 10 days to reach. The White Dragon drove the battleship and focused on traveling. In order to hide his tracks, he had to activate the battleship's invisibility array. Therefore, not only did the god-slaying battleship hide its tracks, but it also concealed its aura. Even though the god-slaying battleship flew for half a month, passing through more than 20 halls territories and many cities and villages, it was not discovered by anyone. On the morning of the 16th day, the god-slaying battleship arrived near a majestic city and stopped in the clouds high in the sky. This time the White Dragon woke his master up. This was already the center of the Taiyu Shrine. It was very likely that God Emperor powerhouses would appear around. The next operation could only be completed by his master. He did not have the strength and ability to do so. More than 40 days had passed in the outside world. Tianxia had been in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for 6 years. In these 6 years he had not been able to raise his cultivation level or condense new Taoist rhymes. However, he had strengthened the foundation of the Middle God Emperor realm and accumulated his strength. He had also strengthened dozens of commonly used mystic skills and techniques and deduced the heaven-punishing divine art. All in all, his strength had improved in an unseen way. Hearing the White Dragon's call, he ended his seclusion and left the distorted space-time. Swoosh! A white light flashed and he appeared in the god-slaying battleship's cockpit. The White Dragon had been waiting for him. When he saw him appear, he hurriedly bowed and greeted his master. After he bowed, Tianxia asked, "Where are we now?" The White Dragon hurriedly answered, "There's a prosperous city tens of thousands of miles ahead. This is the center of the Taiyu Shrine's territory. It's not far from the Taiyu Mystic Realm. After I drove the battleship out of the Chaos Sea, I first entered an unknown place. There I was chased by an ancient beast at the God Emperor realm." The White Dragon first explained the location of this place and then told them about his previous experience. In this way, Ji Tianxing would be able to quickly make the right decision after listening. Alright, you've worked hard during this period of time. Now, you can return to the distorted spacetime and cultivate in seclusion. Ji Tianxing nodded to show that he understood the situation, and then let the white dragon leave. Understood. Bai Long bowed and entered the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda to rest. Only then did Ji Tianxing put away the god-slaying battleship and appeared in the sky alone, entering stealth mode. Not only did he conceal himself, but he also concealed his divine aura. He strode across the sky and flew towards the city ahead. In fact, what the white dragon did was basically in line with his thoughts and expectations. There was nothing to be picky about. He also believed that the Taiyu Shrine would do something. After all, the most important goal of the 4 holy temples was to explore the mystery of the heavenly path. As for what the situation was, he would only know after he investigated it. Not long later, Ji Tianxing arrived at the north gate of the city. This city, which covered a radius of 200 miles, was simple and prosperous. It was called the Green Heart City. It was the nearest big city to the Taiyu Mystery Land. Not only did it have more than 3 million desolate race citizens, it was also the place where many experts who were heading to the Taiyu Mystery Land stayed. Although there were no God Emperor Realm experts in the Green Heart City, there were countless Godly King Realm experts. There were even more than 10 peak Godly Kings in the city. Obviously, this city was the most suitable place to gather information. Although there were many Godly King Realm guards guarding the north and south gates and the 4 sides of the city walls. But those low-level and middle-level divine kings were of no threat to Ji Tianxing at all. He only used a little trick to deceive all the guards and easily stepped into the Green Heart City. After entering the Green Heart City, he secretly released his consciousness to monitor the entire city. He first confirmed that there were no God Emperor Realm experts in the city. No one could pose a threat to him and no one could detect his tracks. Then he extended his consciousness to eavesdrop on the conversations of countless desolate race citizens in the city. Although most of the topics discussed by the people were trivial matters or unimportant gossip, the people of the Eastern continent were all very different from the Eastern continent. However, the focus of Ji Tianxing's surveillance was on those high-level god kings. Most of the upper godly kings were experts with a certain status. They knew more information and secrets than ordinary citizens. Ji Tianxing eavesdropped in the city for 3 days and indeed he found out a lot of useful information. First, he found out about the location and basic situation of the Taiyu Mystery Land, as well as the number of top experts in the Taiyu Shrine. The Taiyu Mystery Land was south of the Green Heart City, about 30 million miles away. It was an endless mountain range with many huge peaks that were tens of thousands of feet tall. In the mountain range and the many huge peaks, there were many divine arrays hidden. Most of them were trapping arrays and maze arrays. Ordinary godly king experts, even if they were a peak godly king, would not be able to find the entrance to the mystery land. As for the top experts in the Taiyu Shrine, everyone knew that there were 6 Hall Masters. They were all God Emperor Realm experts and had been famous for tens of thousands of years. It was said that 8 years ago, the Taiyu Shrine took in another desolate God Emperor, who became the 7th Hall Master of the shrine. This was also the 2nd desolate God Emperor of the Taiyu Shrine. Although many citizens did not feel close to the desolate race and did not revere the newly appointed 7th Hall Master. But many citizens knew that the founder of the Taiyu Shrine, the Honorable Grand Hall Master, was a desolate God Emperor. As early as 100,000 years ago, the Grand Hall Master had founded the Taiyu Shrine. In the following 30,000 years, it took in 5 Hall Masters. According to the news circulating within the shrine, the Grand Hall Master was an expert from the same era as the mysterious ancestor. If there was a God Emperor on the Star of Origin who was most likely to succeed the ancestor and obtain eternal life, it would be the Grand Hall Master. When the news of the 7th Hall Master being appointed spread, many desolate race citizens speculated that it was the desolate God Emperor who had received the Grand Hall Master's recognition. However, the 7th Hall Master was very low-key. He had not made a public appearance ever since he was appointed. As a result, many of the nobles and experts in the Green Heart City could only discuss the news in private. No one knew what the 7th Hall Master looked like. In the past 8 years, the Taiyu Shrine had not taken any action, nor had it issued any orders or held any activities. Even the award ceremony for the 7th Hall Master was only held in the Taiyu Mystery Land. The various hall masters were not invited to attend the ceremony. This also caused the 7th hall master's identity to be a mystery. Many experts were still discussing and guessing in private. Chapter 4673. The information that Ji Tianqing had found out gave him a boost of confidence. At the very least, he was certain that the 7th hall master who joined the Taiyu shrine 8 years ago was Dao Xingyun. However, Dao Xingyun was too low-key. Other than the news of him taking office, there was no other news. Ji Tianqing was only 70 to 80% sure that Dao Xingyun was hiding in the Taiyu secret realm. If he wanted to take revenge on Dao Xingyun, the first thing he had to do was to find out where Dao Xingyun was hiding. If Dao Xingyun was really hiding in the Taiyu secret realm, it would be very troublesome for him. He had to think of a way to sneak into the Taiyu secret realm, then avoid the 6 hall masters of the Taiyu shrine and find Dao Xingyun alone. Finally, he had to secretly get rid of Dao Xingyun without alerting other experts. Only then could his revenge be considered successful. No mistakes could be made in any part of this, and the difficulty was also extremely high. Thinking of this, Ji Tianqing decided to continue hiding in Green Heart City to gather more information and look for an opportunity. Even if he wanted to take revenge, he was not in a hurry. He had waited for so many years and he did not mind waiting a year or so. Time passed and everything in Green Heart City was as usual. After half a month, there were no changes in the city, and there were no major events worth paying attention to. Ji Tianqing hid in the dark for more than 10 days and gathered a lot of information about the Taiyu Shrine and Green Heart City, as well as the dozens of branches. He had a deeper understanding of the Taiyu Shrine, and even found out the strength of several hall masters. He had even heard some rumors about the mysterious Taiyu secret realm, and had a superficial understanding of the environment of the secret realm. Unfortunately, there was very little information about the 7th hall master, Dao Xingyun. There was almost no information that was important for him to take revenge. This made him a little disappointed. He knew that there was no point in continuing to stay in Green Heart City. If he wanted to obtain more useful information, he could only enter the Taiyu secret realm. But the problem was that the Grand Space secret realm was extremely mysterious and heavily guarded. It was absolutely not a place that could be entered casually. Although he was a god emperor, he couldn't just barge into the Grand Universe secret realm without knowing anything. Once the temple masters were alerted, it would be like beating the grass and alerting the snake. With Dao Xingyun's cautious personality, it was almost impossible for him to kill Dao Xingyun. Helpless, Ji Tianqing could only stay in Green Heart City and slowly think of a way. In the beginning, he had wanted to find Green Heart City Lord and capture her secretly. He would either interrogate her for some information or directly possess her body. But then he thought about it and realized that there was a risk of being exposed. Furthermore, the city lord of Green Heart City might not know the exact situation of the Taiyu secret realm and Dao Xingyun. This idea was temporarily shelved. Ji Tianqing decided that if there was no other way, he would use this last resort. Another 3 days passed. Perhaps it was because he had been waiting patiently for an opportunity. Early in the morning, the guards of Green Heart City doubled in strength. Especially the guards at the South City Gate, they were the elites of the elites. They appeared to be in high spirits and solemn. Even the city lord of Green Heart City set off early in the morning. She took a carriage with a large group of guards and personally waited at the South City Gate. In addition, some influential families and God King experts in the city seemed to have received some news and hurried to the South City Gate one after another. Although Ji Tianqing hadn't found out what happened, he guessed the answer when he saw the city lord of Green Heart City and the influential families and experts' attitudes. There must be some distinguished experts who were about to enter Green Heart City. Hence, the city lord and influential families hurried to welcome them. As for who was coming, Ji Tianqing guessed that it was at least a peak god king like the Hall Master. Hence, he focused his attention near the South City Gate and waited patiently. 4 hours later. In the sky tens of thousands of miles to the south of Green Heart City, there was a dazzling divine light that was flying over at lightning speed. Looking at the divine light, the city lord of Green Heart City and the guards near the South City Gate all became alert and raised their heads in anticipation. After a few breaths, the divine light arrived outside the city gate and stopped at a height of 10,000 feet. After the divine light faded, a 10,000 feet long battleship appeared. The battleship was a top-grade king-level divine weapon. It was crimson-red like fire and there was a dense golden light circulating around it. It was very mighty and dignified. On the side of the battleship, there was a huge emblem that was engraved with a complicated pattern. Ji Tianxing stared at the emblem for a while but couldn't tell which force the emblem represented. However, the city lord of Green Heart City had already brought a dozen influential families and experts to welcome them. They flew to the front of the battleship and bowed to the battleship under the lead of the city lord of Green Heart City. The city lord of Green Heart City and his subordinates welcomed the arrival of the South Patrol Governor. We welcome the arrival of the South Patrol Governor. The respectful voices of the crowd resounded far into the sky. At this moment, the battleship's door opened. A tall and burly figure walked out with 6 guards surrounding him. He was a burly, desolate raceman who was more than 10 feet tall. He was dressed in armor that was dark red like fire, and there was a golden battle saber by his waist. He exuded a powerful and domineering aura. Clearly, this red-armored man was the owner of the battleship, the South Patrol Governor, that city lord of Green Heart City and Company had mentioned. What surprised Ji Tianxing was that this South Patrol Governor was not a godly king, but a god emperor expert. However, this god emperor had only broken through a few years ago. He had only condensed 1 Dao charm and was considered the weakest god emperor. This Taiyu Shrine's faction is clearly stronger than the Kongming and Shangqing divine halls. Not only do they have 6 hall lords, even the governors under them are at the god emperor realm. From the looks of it, it will be difficult for me to deal with Dao Xingyun this time. Ji Tianxing silently observed the South Patrol Governor as these thoughts flashed through his mind. At this moment, the South Patrol Governor strode in front of City Lord Greenheart and Company. He extended his hand to help City Lord Greenheart up. "Big brother, there's no need to be so polite. Please get up." The South Patrol Governor was amiable towards City Lord Greenheart. His attitude was rather friendly and he did not put on any airs. However, he did not care about the powerful figures behind City Lord Greenheart. He could not even be bothered to look at them. "Big brother, these 2 fellows are brothers?" Ji Tianxing secretly pricked up his eyebrows. He carefully observed the South Patrol Governor and City Lord Greenheart, only to discover that their eyebrows were indeed very similar. However, City Lord Greenheart's appearance looked old. He was an old man with white hair. As for the South Patrol Governor, he looked capable and valiant. He was a talented general. Ji Tianxing vaguely felt that this matter seemed to be rather interesting. His opportunity might have come. Hence, he stared at City Lord Greenheart and the South Patrol Governor, hoping to find an opportunity and breakthrough from them. After the South Patrol Governor and City Lord Greenheart exchanged some pleasantries, they entered the city side by side and flew towards the City Lord's residence. The Scarlet Red warship was kept by the South Patrol Governor, leaving only 18 guards to follow him. City Lord Greenheart dismissed the powerful figures and accompanied the South Patrol Governor into the City Lord's residence alone. It seemed like she had some secrets to tell. Chapter 4674. Ji Tianxing sensed Greenheart City Lord's intention in advance and had already snuck into the City Lord's residence. As such, Greenheart City Lord and Southern Patrol Commander were less than 3 kilometers away from him after they entered the City Lord's residence. The closer they were, the more he was not afraid of being detected. On the contrary, it was more convenient for him to scout for information. Even if Greenheart City Lord and Southern Patrol Commander entered the study room and activated the Divine Consciousness Isolation Array, they would not be able to block his Divine Consciousness from prying. After all, Greenheart City Lord was only a peak god king and the defensive array in the study room was also of the highest grade king level. Ji Tianxing could easily penetrate the defensive array and monitor the movements in the study room when he executed his secret technique. That Southern Patrol Commander was only at the initial stage of the God Emperor realm and had only condensed 1 trace of Dao presence. As long as Ji Tianxing remained vigilant, the Southern Patrol Commander would not be able to detect any abnormalities and would not be able to sense his presence. Just like that, Greenheart City Lord and Southern Patrol Commander had unknowingly ended their small talk and started to discuss serious matters. They probably felt that the study room was protected by the array and there were dozens of elite guards outside the study room. It was very safe to stay in the study room and no one would eavesdrop on their conversation. Hence, Greenheart City Lord and Southern Patrol Commander did not have any scruples when they talked about many secrets. Ji Tianxing listened silently. From their conversation he learned a lot of useful information. For example, Green Heart City Lord and Southern Patrol Commander were indeed blood brothers and were both peak god kings 10,000 years ago. At that time, Green Heart City Lord had already controlled Green Heart City for close to 20,000 years. His brother was not the Southern Patrol Commander but the Guard Commander of the Taiyu Mystic Realm. When he broke through to the God Emperor realm, he stood out from the other peak god kings and became the 7th God Emperor expert under the Taiyu Shrine. Originally, he was the most promising candidate to become the 7th Hall Master. However, Grand Hall Master felt that he had just broken through to the God Emperor realm and was not strong enough to take up the position of Hall Master. Hence, Grand Hall Master promoted him to Southern Patrol Commander. Taiyu Shrine had Southern Patrol Commander and Northern Patrol Commander. They each led a group of elite God King experts to patrol the north and south region of the shrine. The 2 senior governors were only second to the 6 palace masters and were half a level higher than the senior governors of the Grand Universe Secret Realm. They patrolled the world and monitored dozens of branch halls. They had the authority to represent the 6 hall masters and handle all affairs. Such an improvement was both a motivation and a form of training for the Southern Patrol Governor. The original intention of the Taiyu Shrine was to let him hone his skills as the Southern Patrol Commander for a few thousand years or even tens of thousands of years. When he reaches the middle level of God Emperor, he will immediately be conferred the title of the 7th Palace Lord. However, 10,000 years had passed and the Southern Patrol Governor's strength didn't improve much. He was still at the initial God Emperor level with only 1 Dao ripple. Perhaps it was because he had used up all of his talent, comprehension, and luck to break through to the God Emperor realm. In the entire Star of Origin there were countless God Kings and peak God Kings, but how many of them could break through the shackles and reach the level of God Emperor? The Southern Patrol Governor didn't have a noble ancient bloodline, nor did he have a strong backer or background. It was already unbelievable for him to break through to the God Emperor realm. Therefore, it was reasonable for him to be stagnant after breaking through to the God Emperor realm and be unable to condense a second Dao ripple. If it was only his strength that was stagnant, the Southern Patrol Governor wouldn't be so anxious. However, a few years ago he heard that the Taiyu Shrine had taken in another God Emperor expert. The first Palace Master admired him and conferred him the title of 7th Palace Lord. The Southern Patrol Governor couldn't sit still anymore. His heart was burning with anxiety and he wanted to return to the Grand Universe Secret Realm to figure out the situation. After all, he was the appointed 7th Palace Lord of the Taiyu Shrine. That new God Emperor had obviously snatched the position that originally belonged to him. Even though he knew that it was the first Palace Master's decision, he was still furious and couldn't calm down. However, no matter how sullen he was, he could only endure it. He had been patrolling the southern region of the temple and had to investigate a major case in recent years. Finally, last month he had finished investigating the case and tidied it up. Only then did he rush back. In his current state, it was impossible for him to rush back to the Grand Universe Secret Realm. His personality was straightforward and fiery, and he didn't know how to be tactful with his words. He had a stomach full of anger. If he reported back to the Palace Masters like this, it was hard to guarantee that there would be conflicts. Therefore, as his elder brother, when the Green Heart City Lord knew that he was returning to the Grand Universe Secret Realm, he immediately requested him to stay in Green Heart City for a few days. The Southern Patrol Governor had always respected this elder brother of his. He also knew that his elder brother had been in charge of Green Heart City for tens of thousands of years. To be able to manage the affairs of Green Heart City so well, he was definitely more patient and shrewd than him. Before returning to the Grand Universe Secret Realm, he indeed needed his elder brother's help to plan. In the study, there were a few tables made of fine jade and there was an armchair on both sides. The Green Heart City Lord played with an exquisite teacup and looked at the Southern Patrol Governor opposite him. He said in a low and calm voice, "Qianzhan, you should be appeased after drinking a cup of tea, right?" The 2 brothers had the surname Qian. The Southern Patrol Governor was called Qianzhan, and the Green Heart City Lord was called Qiangui. It was said that their parents named their elder son Qianlong and their younger son Qianzhan. However, when Qianlong grew up, he felt that the name was too high profile. So after his parents passed away, he changed his name to Qiangui. In fact, Qiangui's personality was indeed low-key and introverted, and he was good at scheming and shrewd. Hearing his elder brother's question, Qianzhan put down the teacup in his hand, frowned and sighed. Elder brother, I don't need you to persuade me. I also know that it's useless to be angry. However, I just can't understand and I feel sullen. Under the temple, there are more than 70 branches and hundreds of millions of people know that I am the 7th Palace Master. However, because the time is not right and my strength has not increased, the position is temporarily vacant. But now, I don't know where this foreign race god emperor came from, and without reason, without distinguishing between right and wrong, he snatched away the position that should have belonged to me. Now, I'm afraid that hundreds of millions of people are laughing at me. I don't know how many hall masters are rejoicing in my misfortune. The more Xianxia said, the angrier he got. His emotions that had calmed down with great difficulty were stirred up again. Qiangui waved his hand, indicating for him to calm down. He said in a relaxed tone, neither too fast nor too slow, "This is only your own thoughts and guesses." Actually, everyone is puzzled. No matter if it's the various hall masters or the hundreds of millions of people, they all want to know the background of this foreign race god emperor. Moreover, this foreign race god emperor becoming the 7th Palace Master was a joint decision made by several hall masters. Everyone knows that this has already become a fact and cannot be changed. You don't need to care about what everyone thinks, because everyone's attention is on this 7th Palace Master. What you need to do is to endure, wait and see and understand the situation. Most importantly, you can't show any dissatisfaction or opposition. That is not against the 7th Palace Master, but against the other 6 Palace Masters. Chapter 4675. Qiangui patiently advised him, analyzing the pros and cons of Qianxia and teaching him how to deal with it. Qianxia of course listened attentively and asked a few questions from time to time. Big brother, I understand what you're saying. If I were to make things difficult for the 7th Palace Master, it would be questioning the authority of the 1st Palace Master. But if I appear too calm and not bothered at all, wouldn't the other Palace Masters be suspicious? They are all shrewd people and have long understood my character. Qiangui nodded and revealed a gratified smile. Qianxia, I'm very happy that you can think of this point. This means that your years of experience have not been wasted. That's right, if you can really control your emotions and not reveal anything, then it will indeed arouse the suspicions of the Palace Masters. So this will be a test of your acting ability. You can't make it obvious that you're dissatisfied and angry about it. But at the same time, you must show the disappointment and unwillingness in your heart. Of course, you must remember that even when you're confiding in others, you must not show any disrespect to the Palace Masters. You can only hate yourself for not growing fast enough, for not being able to share the burdens of the Palace Masters, etc. After Qianxia finished listening, he couldn't help but frown. Big brother, isn't this too complicated? I can't show it obviously, but at the same time I have to show the disappointment in my heart. Since I have to confide in others, I can't blame the Palace Masters. This is something I can't do. Qiangui waved his hand and said in a serious tone, Qianxia, if you can't even handle such a small matter, then ask yourself honestly, how can you become a Palace Master? If you're still like this, even if you become a Palace Master, will you really be put in an important position? Qianxia frowned and said with a bitter face, Big brother, don't you understand me? I'm not good at scheming, and scheming, this can't be forced. Qiangui was at his wit's end. He knew that Qianxia was speaking the truth. Qianxia also felt distressed as he slammed the table and scolded, It's all because of that foreign race bastard who popped out of nowhere, causing things to turn out like this. What's more hateful is that I'm not as strong as him. Otherwise, I would definitely challenge him in front of everyone, defeat him and make him scram with his tail between his legs. Calm down. Calm down. Qiangui furrowed his white brows and reprimanded him sternly. Qianxia, I've said so much just now, did you not listen at all? You can only hide this thought in the bottom of your heart. Other than me, you can never reveal it to anyone else. Besides that, I think you're a little impatient. You need to calm down for a few days before you can return to the Grand Universe Secret Realm. Pausing for a moment, seeing that Qianxia was still indignant, Qiangui lowered his voice and said in a serious tone, Actually, I have seriously considered and analyzed that the Palace Masters must have their reasons and objectives for appointing the 7th Palace Master. It was most likely that the 7th Palace Master could provide some help to the Deity Hall. Otherwise, the Hall Masters would never have accepted a foreign god emperor as their Hall Master in such a short time. Even if those palace masters agree, the first palace master will not agree. Qianzhan blinked his eyes and vaguely felt that there was a hidden meaning in his elder brother's words. He asked in a low voice, "Elder brother, you mean?" Qian Gui showed a playful smile and explained, "So I think that the palace masters must not have any feelings or trust for that foreign god emperor. They most likely want to use that foreign god emperor to achieve some goal. This means that the foreign god emperor will not stay for long. Maybe when he's done being used he will part ways with the palace masters." This. Qianzhan was stunned on the spot and showed an expression of disbelief. Then he was overjoyed and excited, and the haze in his heart was swept away. "Elder brother, is this really the result of your speculation? How confident are you?" Qian Gui nodded and said, "This is the result of my analysis in the past few years after combining all the information from various sources and my own speculation. I don't dare to say how confident I am, but I can say that it is very likely. After all, I don't have the qualifications to enter the Grand Universe secret realm and personally investigate the situation. I can only obtain some information through various channels. If you can calm down and go back to the Grand Universe secret realm to gather some information, then I will have more confidence." Hearing this, Qianzhan quickly nodded and said expectantly, "Elder brother, don't worry, I will disguise myself well and gather some useful information." Qian Gui of course did not dare to believe that he could control himself, so he could only encourage him and ask him to rest in Green Heart City for 2 days before returning to the Grand Universe secret realm. The two brothers' conversation came to an end, and at this time, Qian Gui revealed a secret that made Qianzhan even more excited. In fact, the sudden appearance of the foreign god emperor made everyone curious. "I believe that you're definitely not the only one who has thoughts of rejecting him. There are even many people inside the Grand Universe secret realm. When you gather information, pay attention to those who oppose the 7th Palace Master and try to maintain a relationship with them. If any of the Palace Masters have a problem with the 7th Palace Master, then it would be best." Qianzhan nodded again and his eyes became brighter and more confident. After talking about business, Qian Gui chatted with Qianzhan for a while before ending the conversation. He arranged a place for Qianzhan to stay and let him rest. Although Qianzhan wanted to immediately return to the Grand Universe secret realm to gather information, he understood that the reason why his elder brother asked him to stay in Green Heart City for 2 days was to let him calm down. Therefore, Qianzhan could only listen to his elder brother's advice and stay in the palace. Ji Tianxing, who had been hiding in the dark, heard the conversation between the two brothers clearly and clearly. Through the conversation between Qian Gui and Qianzhan, he also had a preliminary understanding of the nature of the two brothers. Qianzhan's character could be seen at a glance. Ji Tianxing had already decided that he would start from Qianzhan and find a breakthrough. As for Qian Gui, a small palace master who was not even a hall master, actually had such knowledge and shrewdness, which made Ji Tianxing somewhat shocked. Although Green Heart City's geographical location was special, it was easier for Qian Gui to obtain useful information and clues. But with his strength and status, it was already very impressive that he could deduce that the palace masters were using the 7th palace master with his own knowledge and wisdom. In the next 2 days, Ji Tianxing had been hiding in the palace. Qianzhan stayed in his residence obediently and cultivated when he had nothing to do. He was not worthy of Ji Tianxing's attention. Qian Gui, on the other hand, frequently made small movements. In order to help his younger brother find a way, he met with many influential people in the city and tried to find out the situation in the Grand Universe secret realm. Chapter 4676. Ji Tianxing had been keeping an eye on Qian Gui. Qian Gui had met with various dignitaries and tried his best to obtain information. Unfortunately, the information he obtained was not of much value. Ji Tianxing had monitored him for 2 days but did not obtain any important information. He felt slightly regretful. Fortunately, on the 3rd day when Qianzhan was about to leave Green Heart City, he still had some information. Qianzhan had returned to the Great Space Secret Realm to report. He had originally driven a warship and brought a few dozen guards with him. However, he had stayed in the city lord's mansion and moved alone, leaving his guards in the warship. As for the warship, he had kept it in his body and carried it with him. Ji Tianxing had thought of attacking Qianzhan, but the risk was too great and he would be exposed easily. Thus, he could only attack Qianzhan's guards to find an opportunity to sneak into the Great Space Secret Realm. In the past 2 days he did not have a chance to attack. Until this morning when Qian Gui personally sent Qianzhan out of the city, he finally had a chance. The two brothers walked side by side, accompanied by a dozen dignitaries and a large group of guards. As for Qianzhan's divine worship, it was already controlled by the guards and was waiting in the sky outside the city gate. In order to show the prestige of the Southern Patrol commander, 18 guards stood in the sky and lined up in 2 rows beside the divine worship. On the other side, Qian Gui, Qianzhan and the others were still walking in the city. As they rushed to the city gate, they gave some instructions. The two sides were separated by 100 miles. It would take at least 15 minutes for Qianzhan to board the divine worship. This was a good opportunity. Ji Tianxing decisively made his move. He aimed at the back of the group, the guard closest to the divine worship. That guard was in the 6th level of the Divine King realm. He wore a standard silver armor and stood in the sky expressionlessly. Ji Tianxing approached while invisible and quietly released an invisible force to envelop him. This guard was sealed on the spot. He could not move or make a sound, as if he was petrified. Immediately after, Ji Tianxing used his divine sense to shatter the guard's godhead and killed him instantly. He kept his original body in the Jiutian Tenju pagoda and the godhead entered the guard's body, completing the possession. The entire process was as fast as lightning and it was completed in a single breath. There was no sound and there was no movement. Even though the guards at the side had vaguely sensed something, they were at a loss, not knowing what had happened. They quietly looked at their companions around them as well as the sky around the divine ship. Seeing that there was nothing out of the ordinary in the surroundings, he quietly withdrew his gaze and continued to maintain his stone-like posture. After all, the governor would soon arrive at the city gates and board the divine worship. At that time, the Green Heart City Lord and many other influential officials would be present. If the governor found out that they were looking around and had lost their manners, they would be severely punished. Just like that, Ji Tianxing completed the possession without any danger. With a shake of his body, he became a guard under hidden battle. About 15 minutes later, Qian Gui and the other nobles escorted Qianzhan to the city gate. Both sides bowed and said their goodbyes. Under everyone's gaze, the hidden fighter stepped onto the divine worship. The 18 guards followed closely behind and returned to the divine worship. Thus, the divine worship floating in the sky turned around and flew in the direction of the Taiyu Mystery Plane. When the divine worship disappeared into the horizon, Qian Gui and the other nobles turned around and returned to the city. For some reason, as Qian Gui watched the divine worship leave, there was a lingering worry in his heart that was difficult to eliminate. But when he thought about it carefully, he could not remember what he had overlooked. After pondering for a while, he still could not figure it out. He could only comfort himself that he was too worried about Hidden Battle's temper, which was why he felt uneasy. After Hidden Battle entered the divine worship, he went to his room to rest and prepare to report back. The captain of the guards led 7 guards in charge of operating the divine worship. The rest of the guards returned to their rooms to rest. With the speed of Hidden Battle's divine worship, it only took half a day to travel from Greenheart City to the Taiyu Mystery Plane. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing closed his room and took out the Jiutian 10 Absolutes pagoda. He entered the distorted space-time and hurriedly refined the guard's shard of divinity. He had possessed the tall and mighty young guard. Of course, he had to obtain the memories of his soul as soon as possible. Only then would he be able to interact with others and not reveal his identity. Thankfully, the guard's cultivation realm was not high. With Ji Tianxing's strength, it only took him a few days to refine the shard of divinity. Not only did he obtain the guard's shard of divinity, he also absorbed the corresponding divine power. This young desolate race guard's name was Yi Jingfeng. He came from a remote branch and was an outstanding genius from that branch. He was quite famous. Unfortunately, this dazzling genius from the branch had become an unknown pawn after entering the Taiyu Mystery Plane as a guard. He was introverted and kept a low profile. He was a man of few words and did not receive much attention. To Yi Jingfeng, this was obviously a setback and depressing. But to Ji Tianxing, Yi Jingfeng's background and personality were exactly what he wanted. He needed an inconspicuous identity like Yi Jingfeng to be able to move around the Taiyu Mystery Plane more easily. When he left the distorted spacetime and returned to his room, only 4 hours had passed. He meditated in his room, allowing the shard of divinity and Yi Jingfeng's divine body to become more compatible. This way it would be easier for him to hide his divine power and cultivation realm. He was confident that he would not be exposed even if he were to face an initial god emperor in a hidden battle. Unknowingly, half a day passed. The divine worship had just crossed tens of millions of miles and arrived at the Taiyu Mystery Plain. Just as Ji Tianqing understood, the entrance to the Taiyu Mystery Plain was in a majestic mountain range. This mountain range was extremely vast, and it was covered by dense primeval forests, causing it to appear as if it was inaccessible. Between the mountains there were deep ravines and canyons. There were also many divine arrays that formed an invisible barrier that blocked all outsiders. The captain of the divine worship and the others naturally knew about those divine arrays and restrictions. They had already memorized a familiar path. The divine worship passed through the layers of divine arrays without any obstructions and arrived at a canyon about 3,000 feet deep. On one side of the canyon, there was a cliff that was tens of thousands of feet tall and covered in moss and vines. On the surface there was nothing wrong with the nearly straight cliff. But in reality the entrance to the Taiyu Mystery Plain was hidden here. The divine worship stopped outside the cliff. The captain of the divine worship flew out of the divine worship. He held the divine worship's token and chanted at the cliff. Then the guards guarding the entrance to the Taiyu Mystery Plain received the message and confirmed the other party's identity before opening the entrance. All of a sudden, the moss-covered cliff glowed brightly with a dazzling divine light, which quickly formed a formation. In a few seconds, the array formed a door of light that was 1,000 feet tall. After the entrance to the Taiyu Mystery Plain appeared, the captain of the divine worship returned to the divine worship. He controlled the divine worship to shrink more than 10 times its size before slowly passing through the door of light. Whoosh! With a flash of white light, the divine worship passed through the door of light and entered the Taiyu Mystery Plain. Chapter 4677. Before entering the Grand Universe Mystery Dimension, Ji Tianqing had investigated the Grand Universe Mystery Dimension when he was still in Greenheart City. He had a certain understanding of the Grand Universe Mystery Dimension. The Mystery Dimension was an alternate dimension that had existed since the ancient era. No one knew when it was created. However, according to the news from the Taiyu Shrine, it had at least 1,000,000 years of history. The Mystery Dimension was hundreds of thousands of miles wide, like a small world. It had the light of the sun, moon and stars, mountains, rivers, steep peaks, cliffs and waterfalls that flowed down 3,000 feet. The Mystery Dimension was filled with divine power. There were countless divine arrays that gathered divine power and covered hundreds of palaces and mansions. Inside the Mystery Dimension, one only needed to cultivate in peace and their strength would increase day by day. Divine flowers, fruits and trees could be seen everywhere. In the depths of the mountains and earth, there were hundreds of hidden ores and divine stones. Under normal circumstances, there were close to 80,000 people living in the Grand Universe Mystery Dimension. 80% of them were God King powerhouses. There were only 10,000 or so Divine Lord powerhouses. They were the servants and attendants of the various palaces and residences. Of the 80% godly kings, 40,000 were Taiyu Shrine's divine guards. The divine guard's main duty was to guard and protect the Grand Universe Mystery Dimension. Secondly, the temple masters and governors would lead the divine guards when they were out on business or patrolling the territory of the temple. In addition, there were more than 20,000 godly kings. They were the young geniuses and elites that the temple had selected from the various temples. These lucky ones stood out from the millions of people and were escorted to the Grand Universe Mystery Dimension to cultivate. The temple provided them with excellent treatment and conditions, abundant cultivation resources, and even guidance from the temple masters. They only had one goal, and that was to do their best to increase their strength and maximize their potential in order to break through to the God Emperor realm. Since 20,000 years ago, the temple began to hold the genius selection competition to select elites from dozens of temples. It was held once every 100 years. In fact, the temple had selected close to 50,000 geniuses and elites in the past 20,000 years. However, many young geniuses cultivated in the Grand Universe Mystery Dimension for over 10,000 years, but their strength did not reach the expectations of the temple masters. As a result, those young geniuses could only be eliminated. They left the Grand Universe secret realm and returned to their respective halls. At present there were still more than 20,000 young geniuses in the temple, and this number would be maintained in the future. Every 100 years, new geniuses and elites would be selected to enter the Grand Universe secret realm. Naturally, there would be a group of geniuses who couldn't meet the expectations of the palace masters and were kicked out of the Grand Universe secret realm. The millions of citizens felt that this was the deity's Templar nurturing young geniuses and elites to strengthen the deity's Templar's talent pool and nurture God Emperor level experts. For example, the 6th Palace Master and the Southern Patrol Governor Hidden Battle were both selected through this method and trained to become God Emperor. But when Ji Tianxing heard the news, his first reaction was that the Taiyu Shrine was using this method to find the chosen one who could solve the mystery of immortality. Compared to the other shrines, the Taiyu Shrine was obviously wiser and had more foresight. Using this method to find the so-called Heaven's Chosen One, of course, couldn't be better. Even if they couldn't find the Chosen One, the Taiyu Shrine could still nurture a large number of useful talents, and even nurture 2 God Emperor level experts. Ji Tianxing had reason to believe that the Taiyu Shrine's foundation was definitely one of the best among the 4 shrines. After entering the Grand Universe secret realm, Hidden Battle's divine worship bathed in the warm sunlight and crossed the vast grassland. The exit of the secret realm was at the end of the grassland on a man-made altar. Ji Tianxing paid special attention to the altar. It was hundreds of meters tall and tens of thousands of meters wide. It was very sacred and majestic. The altar was built with a large number of top-grade materials and set up with 3 layers of emperor-level divine arrays. It was extremely sturdy and tight. Even if he wanted to break the array outside the secret realm and force his way into the Grand Universe secret realm, he would have to spend decades before he could succeed. Based on this alone, the Grand Universe secret realm was much stronger than the Shangqing Shrine and Kongming Temple. In addition, there were thousands of God King divine guards around the altar, guarding it day and night. Thinking about the 40,000 divine guards, more than 20,000 God King elites, and 7 God Emperor level temple masters in the secret realm Hidden Battle. Now Hidden Battle, the Southern Patrol Commander, was back. It was no exaggeration to say that the Grand Universe secret realm was the most dangerous place where true experts gathered. No matter how many tricks Ji Tianxing had up his sleeve, he had to be careful in the Grand Universe secret realm. The slightest mistake could expose his identity and he would be in danger. Swoosh. The divine worship passed through the blue sky and white clouds, heading straight for the mountains in the distance. After crossing tens of thousands of miles of grassland, endless mountains came into sight. The winding mountain range was like a dark green dragon lying on the ground. It was vast and majestic. One mountain after another stood tall like monuments, recording the vicissitudes of the Grand Universe mystic realm. After flying for more than 400,000 miles, the divine worship finally arrived at the center of the secret realm. At the same time, it was also the highest point of the mountain range, the origin of countless mountain ranges. Ji Tianxing noticed that there were a few towering peaks among the mountains which were the most majestic. Each peak stood tall, connecting the clouds and the blue sky to the vast earth. At the top of those few giant peaks, there were many magnificent divine palaces of different heights. They were arranged in picturesque disorder. There were more than 300 palaces and mansions on the 7 giant peaks. Of course, 6 of the peaks had more palaces and mansions. Only the 7th peak had the most magnificent palace, with only a few palaces and mansions beside it. Such a layout was clear at a glance. Ji Tianxing knew at a glance that the 6 ancient peaks with many palaces and mansions must be the residences of the previous 6 temple masters. Surrounded by several peaks, the one in the center was especially majestic and solemn. That must be the residence of the first temple master. As for the 7th peak with fewer palaces, it must be the residence of the new 7th temple master. Ji Tianxing silently memorized the order of the peaks and the layout of the residences of the first temple master and the 7th temple master. In addition, he also noticed that there was an inconspicuous peak not far from the 7 peaks. There were dozens of palaces and mansions on that 50,000 feet tall mountain. They were half hidden by hundreds of towering trees. Swoosh. The divine worship flew across the sky and finally landed on that inconspicuous peak. Ji Tianxing immediately understood that this mountain was the residence of the northern and southern patrol governors, as well as the soldiers under their command. At the same time, thousands of divine guards also lived here. Chapter 4678. The divine ship landed outside a divine palace. Ji Tianxing followed the guards and left the divine ship. Qianzhan was the last to leave. He waved his hand and put away the divine ship. Escorted by the guards, he returned to the divine palace. The guard captain ordered everyone to return to their rooms to rest. Only 3 guards were left to accompany Qianzhan to report to the first hallmaster. When the guard captain called out his name, Ji Tianxing took a step forward and stood closer to the guard captain, in a more conspicuous position. Thus the guard captain didn't think much and called out his name. Just like that, Ji Tianxing followed the guard captain and Qianzhan into the sky, heading straight for the first hallmaster's residence. Ji Tianxing was keenly aware that the guards who weren't named didn't reveal looks of regret. Instead, they revealed looks of joy in their eyes. As for the 2 guards beside him, they were also serious in speech and manner. Their expressions were solemn and dignified. Ji Tianxing felt it. Accompanying Qianzhan to report to the first hallmaster wasn't a good job. After all, the guards all knew that Qianzhan's 7th hallmaster position had been snatched away. Qianzhan was furious and angry. If this hot-tempered governor had a verbal argument or conflict with the Lord Hallmaster, they would suffer as well. In addition, the results of Qianzhan's investigation in the south weren't satisfactory. After the first hallmaster heard the results, he would scold and reprimand Qianzhan. Lowly guards like them wouldn't have a good time. But Ji Tianxing didn't care. He just wanted to take this opportunity to understand the first hallmaster's situation. Of course, the prerequisite was that the first hallmaster couldn't see through his disguise and see that he was possessed. Soon Qianzhan, escorted by 4 guards, flew to the first hallmaster's residence. The group descended from the sky and landed outside the most majestic and sacred gate of the great universe divine palace. The resplendent palace exuded a solemn and dignified aura. The 20 guards outside the gate wore bright silver armor and held golden spears in their hands. They looked very awe-inspiring. Most likely, the guards guarding the great universe divine palace had a higher status than the other divine guards. As for the guards under the southern patrol governor, they were a motley crew that couldn't be compared to them. Thus, when Qianzhan stated his purpose, the silver-armored guard captain only nodded and expressionlessly entered the divine palace to report. The other guards also remained motionless, not saying a word. A moment later, the silver-armored guard captain returned to the gate and said, "Southern Patrol Governor, please go to the study to see the hallmaster." Qianzhan didn't say much. He led Ji Tianxing and the others up the stairs and into Taiyu Divine Palace, heading for the study. It was only at this moment that Ji Tianxing realized that the unmoving silver-armored guards were looking at them with complicated gazes. There was 70% disdain and 30% scrutiny in his tone. It felt like he was inspecting the guards of the Southern Patrol Governor to see if there were any violations of the rules. Even on the way to the study, passing through the hall and the walkway under the eaves, they met a few groups of silver-armored guards. They all had the same look. Ji Tianxing finally understood. It was no wonder the other guards were unwilling to come to the great universe divine palace. How could a normal desolate race young godly king endure the condescending gazes of the silver-armored guards and their disdainful looks? They were all guards and middle-level godly kings. How could they be looked down upon by others? Furthermore, the danger had yet to come. Southern Patrol Governor Qianzhan requests an audience with the Lord Hallmaster. Qianzhan led everyone to the outside of the study. He bowed with his hands clasped in front of his chest and shouted loudly. The 8 silver-armored guards guarding the study were clearly the Lord Hallmaster's trusted guards. They were all high-level godly kings. They appeared to be even more dignified and aloof as they looked down at Ji Tianxing and the others with condescending gazes. Of course, the Southern Patrol Governor was an exception. Following that, a deep and dignified male voice came from the study. "Come in." The silver-armored guards at the door opened the study. Qianzhan's expression was calm as he carefully stepped into the study. After he entered the study, the silver-armored guards closed the door again. As for Ji Tianxing and the other 3, they could only wait outside the study. They were not qualified to enter the study. The other three lowered their heads and maintained a respectful and cautious posture. Only Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to glance into the study when the door was open. He glanced into the study. Behind the large desk, there was a white-haired old man in an exquisite purple robe sitting on a divine jade throne. Unsurprisingly, the dignified old man with a square face and wide nose was not from the desolate race. He was from the god race of the god world. It was said that he was second only to the mysterious patriarch. He was the most likely expert to obtain eternal life, the god emperor. Ji Tianxing also felt the aura of an upper-level god emperor. He confirmed the Lord Hallmaster's strength. Thankfully, the Lord Hallmaster was leaning on the throne with his eyes closed. He was deep in thought. As for the guards outside the study as well as Ji Tianxing's gazes, he did not care. The study door was closed but the defensive array was not activated. Hence, after Qianzhan entered the study, he bowed to the Lord Hallmaster and reported the situation. Ji Tianxing heard everything clearly. He even heard the Lord Hallmaster reprimanding Qianzhan with a dignified and deep voice for not handling the matter properly. After 15 minutes, Qianzhan finished his report. The Lord Hallmaster also issued an order to make the final decision on the matter. After Qianzhan acknowledged the order, he prepared to leave the study. However, the Lord Hallmaster asked him to stay and took the initiative to mention the matter of the 7th Hallmaster. Qianzhan, everyone knows. Back then, I promised you that I would give you the position of 7th Hallmaster. And now, I have given the position of 7th Hallmaster to someone else. What are your thoughts on this matter? Back in Green Heart City, Qian Gui had warned Qianzhan that he would encounter such a situation. He also taught Qianzhan how to deal with it. Therefore, Qianzhan responded unhurriedly and showed a guilty look. He replied, Lord Hallmaster, you promised me this matter back then to motivate me. I can only blame myself for being untalented and not being diligent enough in cultivation. My strength has stagnated and I am ashamed of the Divine Hall's cultivation. As for your appointment of 7th Hallmaster, you naturally have your reasons and considerations. I am neither qualified nor dare to have any thoughts. The Lord Hallmaster seemed to be satisfied with this answer. After nodding, he continued, It's best that you don't have any thoughts. Even if you are still a little unhappy, I still hope that you can maintain your rationality and restraint. Don't be emotional when carrying out tasks and orders. Otherwise, I will punish you more than today. Qianzhan acted as if he was treading on thin ice and repeatedly said that he did not dare to. The Lord Hallmaster waved his hand and ordered him to leave. Therefore, Qianzhan left the study with his tail between his legs. With a black face, he did not say a word and left with Ji Tianxing and the others. The silver-armored guards guarding the door all revealed looks of disdain and schadenfreude. Chapter 46-79. The first Hallmaster's attitude and Qianzhan's encounter were within everyone's expectations. If Qianzhan had not stayed in Green Heart City for 2 days before returning to the Taiyu secret realm and listened to Qian Gui's advice, he might have argued with the first Hallmaster just now. There might even have been a dispute between the two. But Qianzhan remembered his elder brother's teachings and controlled his emotions well. He also gave an appropriate answer. On the surface, he left the study with a dark face and a gloomy face. In fact, this was part of his performance. After leaving the Taiyu Divine Palace, Qianzhan's expression returned to normal. He led Ji Tianxing and the others back to their residence. In fact, the person who gained the most from this trip to the study was Ji Tianxing. Not only did he see the first Hallmaster and remember his appearance, but he also confirmed his strength and realm. He also understood his nature. Perhaps it was difficult for outsiders to understand why the first Hallmaster felt familiar with the alien god emperor at first sight and hastily decided to make him the 7th Hallmaster. But Ji Tianxing knew the reason. The 7th Hallmaster was Zhou Xian. Like the first Hallmaster, he came from the god realm and was also a god race. The first Hallmaster came to the Star of Origin more than 90,000 years ago. Here, through his own efforts and accumulation, he finally created the Colossus Taiyu Shrine. He would not be able to return to the god realm. But when he saw his own race from his homeland, it would definitely evoke memories and make him want to be close and take care of them. But it was precisely because of this that Ji Tianxing found it difficult to deal with. Zhou Xian is not very strong, but he is quite lucky to have the Taiyu Shrine as his backer. especially when he has a relationship with the first hallmaster. It is indeed a headache to have such a powerful expert as his backing. Ji Tianxing decided to take the long view. He had to understand the situation clearly and think of a foolproof plan before making a move on Dao Xingyun. After Qian Zhan returned to his residence, he locked himself in a secret room. It was obvious that he must have sent a message to Qian Gui to report what happened today and ask him for advice. Ji Tianxing stayed alone in his room, quietly contemplating and sorting out his thoughts for his future actions. Although he wanted to find out the contents of the messages between hidden battle and hidden return. However, that would be too dangerous. Not only would he have to release his divine sense, but he would also have to use his divine abilities and secret techniques. The other 7 God Emperor Realm Hall Masters were within 1,000 miles, and it was too easy for them to sense anything amiss. We've basically confirmed the first Palace Master situation. Next, he had to find a way to find out the truth about the 7th Palace Master and confirm his identity. Was he really Dao Xingyun? Also, what was Dao Xingyun's situation in the Great Space Secret Realm? After that, he had to figure out the attitudes and thoughts of the other Palace Masters and see if he could find an opportunity from them. Of course, this idea of mine should also be the plan that the 2 brothers Qianzhan and Qiangui are about to execute. In a sense, Ji Tianxing had the same goal as hidden warfare and hidden return. The difference was that Ji Tianxing desperately wanted to get rid of Dao Xingyun and take revenge. The 2 brothers, Qianzhan and Qiangui, only wanted to seize the 7th Palace Master's position and force him out of the Taiyu Shrine. Facts proved that Ji Tianxing had not only sorted out his thoughts, but also correctly guessed Qiangui and Qianzhan's plan. Qianzhan rested for a whole night in the secret room. The next morning he asked the captain of the guards to prepare a grand gift. Then he took the gift and left his residence, accompanied by the guard captain and 3 other guards, and rushed to the mountain peak where the 7th Palace Master lived. Unsurprisingly, the 3 guards beside Qianzhan were the same 3 who accompanied him to the Great Space Divine Palace yesterday. Ji Tianxing was one of them. Qianzhan called out names this time. The other guards who were not called did not show any reaction on the surface, but in fact they were all secretly relieved. After all, when they heard Qianzhan say that he was going to visit the 7th Palace Master and congratulate him on taking office, they all felt that this matter was a little strange. Everyone knew that Qianzhan was very dissatisfied with the 7th Palace Master, but they did not expect him to take the initiative to congratulate the 7th Palace Master. There was definitely a problem. They were afraid that Qianzhan was angry and wanted to provoke the 7th Palace Master. Maybe there would be a conflict between the 2 sides. Therefore the other guards all retreated and hid desperately. Who dared to go forward? Qianzhan flew across the sky expressionlessly and landed on the mountain peak where the 7th Palace Master lived. The guard captain followed closely behind, expressionless, his eyes calm and indifferent. The other 2 guards were not shrewd. Their expressions were obviously gloomy, and their eyes were filled with worry. Only Ji Tianxing did not change his expression. He secretly observed the palaces and mansions on the mountain peak, clearly understanding the layout of the buildings and the array arrangement. This was the first time he had come to the residence of the 7th Palace Master, but it would not be the last. The sooner he figured out the layout of the place and the array arrangement, the easier it would be for him to take action next time. The mountain peak with a radius of 30 miles could have been lined with dozens of palaces and mansions. But Ji Tianxing only saw 3 palaces and 4 mansions as far as the eye could see. Even the number of guards was a mere 700 to 800. One had to know that the residences of the other 6 palace masters had 1,000 to 2,000 or even a few thousand guards. After careful observation, Ji Tianxing realized that among the 3 palaces, the most eye-catching palace in the middle was the Fanxing Palace where the 7th Palace Master lived. The other 2 palaces were occupied by some desolate race youths. They were probably the geniuses and elites that the temple had chosen from the various halls. As for the 4 mansions, they were occupied by guards and servants. However, they were not fully occupied and there were still many empty rooms. From this, it could be seen that the 7th Palace Master was not very popular in the Grand Universe Mystic Realm. This was also reasonable. He appeared out of nowhere and was suddenly appreciated by the head Palace Master. In a short 10 years he was conferred the title of 7th Palace Master. It had only been a few years since he became the 7th Palace Master. Even if the seventh palace master was appreciated by the head palace master, and had a good relationship with the other palace masters, it was impossible for him to have a good relationship with both sides. The time was too short, so the people from the Taiyu shrine did not know him well. He was also from a foreign race of unknown origins. He was like a rootless duckweed that could not be trusted. Naturally, no one would seek refuge with him or treat him as a backer. The young geniuses and elites that lived here, as well as a few hundred guards and more than 1,000 servants, were all assigned by the head palace master. This was also because the head palace master was taking care of him by assigning some people to keep up appearances. If the seventh palace master were to recruit his own subordinates, the entire mountain peak would probably be empty, making it look extremely shabby. As Ji Tianxing was pondering over these matters, Qianzhan had already led the group to the entrance of the Fanxing Palace. The guards that guarded the Fanxing Palace were also dressed in silver armor and wielded dark golden spears. However, their mental strength couldn't compare to the guards of Taiyu Divine Palace. There was no other way. The confidence of these guards came from the palace master that they were loyal to. The guards under the first palace master were naturally the most arrogant, despotic, and haughty ones. On the contrary, the guards under the seventh palace master were the least confident. Chapter 4680. Obviously, the silver-armored guards guarding the Palace of Stars all knew Qianzhan, the Southern Patrol commander. They had also heard that the first hallmaster had promised to give the position of the seventh hallmaster to Qianzhan. Therefore, when they saw Qianzhan coming to the Palace of Stars, they were a little nervous. They not only clenched the spears in their hands, but also showed vigilance in their eyes. They probably misunderstood that Qianzhan had brought a few guards to the Palace of Stars to make trouble and ask for an explanation. After all, with Qianzhan's hot temper, it was not surprising that he would do such a thing. As Qianzhan stepped on the steps in front of the palace and walked toward the gate of the palace, the guards at the gate became more and more nervous. Fortunately, Qianzhan stopped 20 steps away from the guards and said, "Southern Patrol Commander Qianzhan is here to congratulate the 7th Hallmaster. Congratulations on your appointment. Please pass the message." The guards at the gate of the palace were obviously stunned when they heard Qianzhan's words. They all thought that they had heard it wrong. They could not believe that Qianzhan would come to congratulate the 7th Hallmaster. However, the guards who could guard the gate of the Palace of Stars were all elites of the guards. They quickly came to their senses and retracted their stunned expressions. Their expressions returned to normal. The leader of the guards bowed to Qianzhan and said, "Please wait a moment." Then he quickly turned around and entered the Palace of Stars to pass the message. Qianzhan remembered his elder brother's teaching. He stood still in front of the palace, looking quite calm and collected. The guards guarding the Palace of Stars were secretly relieved when they saw that he was not angry and did not show any signs of attacking. Not long after, the silver-armored guard leader came back. He looked at Qianzhan with a strange look and bowed. "Please enter the palace, Southern Patrol Commander." After that, he personally led the way and led Qianzhan and the others into the Palace of Stars. The strange look in the guard leader's eyes was difficult for ordinary people to notice. Even if they saw it, they would not understand it. However, Ji Tianxing could guess that it was the true portrayal of the guard leader's heart. The fact that Qianzhan personally came to congratulate the 7th Palace Master was already inconceivable and unbelievable. At this time, the 7th Hallmaster should have declined and found an excuse not to see Qianzhan. However, to everyone's surprise, the 7th Palace Master agreed without hesitation. Moreover, the 7th Hallmaster had to dress up and receive Qianzhan in the reception hall with a grand ceremony. This was even more confusing and strange. After a while, the guard leader led Qianzhan and the others into the reception hall on the side of the Palace of Stars. The hall, with a radius of several hundred feet, was extremely spacious and bright. The floor was paved with golden divine jade and carved with patterns of flowers and trees. Zhan Zhan Zhan. The Zhan Zhan Zhan. Zhan 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 Zhan. Zhan 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 Han Han Zhan 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 Zhan. Zhan 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 Zhan. Zhan 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 Zhan. The silver-armored guard captain asked the hidden warrior to take a seat in the guest seat and ordered 2 maids to bring over divine tea, divine fruits and snacks. Then he left the guest hall. Qianzhan calmly sat on a large wooden chair, holding a teacup and silently drinking tea. Ji Tianxing and the other 3 people stood behind him. The captain of the guards and the 2 guards maintained a quiet and respectful posture. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to observe the layout of the surroundings and the defenses. In less than 100 breaths of time, the guards at the entrance of the hall announced loudly, "Lord Temple Master has arrived." As the guard's voice fell, the figure of a tall, thin and upright Protoss man appeared at the entrance of the hall. Qianzhan turned his head towards the source of the sound and subconsciously stood up to greet him. Ji Tianxing and the other 3 guards also turned their heads to look at the figure, their gazes focused on him. Everyone was very curious about the mysterious 7th Palace Master. Who exactly was he? When Ji Tianxing saw the God Clan man dressed in golden robes, his pupils shrank slightly. He saw that the tall, thin God Clan man was a middle-aged man of about 40 years old. His face was like jade, his eyes like cold stars. His entire person was handsome and elegant, but he did not lose his swift and fierce aura. He was dressed in a luxurious golden robe with a dark red jade belt around his waist. He wore a 7-star divine crown on his head, and his long dark red hair hung down his back. When he stepped into the hall, there were spatial fluctuations around him as he walked. There were also traces of Taoist rhymes and the powerful aura of the God Emperor floating around. When Qianzhan saw the middle-aged God Clan man, his first impression was that he did not look domineering, but his style was swift and fierce. Most importantly, this guy had the strength of the middle level of the God Emperor, and he had at least condensed 4 different Taoist rhymes. In conclusion, this 7th Palace Master was not to be trifled with. When Ji Tianxing observed this information, he was most concerned about one thing. The newly appointed 7th Palace Master of the Taiyu Shrine was from the God Clan of the God Realm. At the same time, he was also someone he knew. Dao Xingyun. That's right, just as he guessed, Dao Xingyun was the 7th Palace Master. Southern Patrol Commander Qianzhan greets the 7th Palace Master. Qianzhan came back to his senses and was the first to break the silence. He took the initiative to greet Dao Xingyun and bowed. Dao Xingyun walked quickly toward Qianzhan, a warm and friendly smile on his thin face. He reached out to support Qianzhan's arm and quickly said, "Commander Qianzhan, you are too polite, quickly get up." Qianzhan did not expect his reaction and he was shocked and confused. Everyone knew that he and the 7th Palace Master should be enemies. But he did not expect the 7th Palace Master to be so friendly to him, as if it was not the first time they met, but an old friend who had reunited after many years. Under normal circumstances, the 7th Palace Master should address him as Southern Patrol Commander. But the 7th Palace Master addressed him as Commander Qianzhan, which only friends would address him this way as it sounded intimate. Big brother is right, if I act hypocritical, the other party will be more hypocritical than me. This thought flashed through Qianzhan's mind, but on the surface he showed a surprised smile and quickly greeted the 7th Palace Master. The 2 God Emperors, each with their own thoughts, flattered and praised each other in the hall. One praised the other party's strength, that he was highly regarded by the Lord Palace Master, and that it was the honor of millions of people to be able to join the Taiyu Shrine. The other praised the other party for his hard work, for patrolling the south, for pleading for the people of the world, and for being the pillar of the Divine Hall, the right-hand man of each Palace Master. Dao Xingyun was obviously familiar with this kind of situation, and handled it calmly and easily. But Qianzhan's response was a little stiff and obviously inexperienced. Some words of flattery, before he could say them he began to feel awkward. Fortunately, Dao Xingyun saw that Qianzhan was struggling to cope, and ended the greetings early and invited him to take a seat. When Dao Xingyun sat down on the main seat, Qianzhan then told the guard captain to take out the big gift and present it to Dao Xingyun. Chapter 4681. Qianzhan's visit to the Palace of Stars was just a cover. His real purpose was to meet the 7th Hall Master and figure out his background. Now, not only did he meet the 7th Hall Master, but he also witnessed the 7th Hall Master's shrewdness and strength. If Qianzhan were him, he would probably find some excuses to have more contact with the 7th Hall Master in order to have a deeper understanding of him. But he was Qianzhan and was not good at feigning civility. In a verbal confrontation with the 7th Hall Master, he could not gain any advantage. Therefore, after Qianzhan gave the gift and complimented the seventh hallmaster, he was about to leave. On the contrary, the seventh hallmaster Dao Xingyun had already seen through Qianzhan's intention and knew that Qianzhan's nature was not good, so he was very enthusiastic to keep Qianzhan. Dao Xingyun even invited Qianzhan to tour the garden and give him pointers on how to arrange the palaces and courtyards around the Palace of Stars and what to build. Dao Xingyun's words and actions all revealed one meaning. Not only did he not reject Qianzhan, but he also intended to rope him in. This made Qianzhan at a loss, and he was even more convinced that Dao Xingyun was a hypocrite. However, he had to pretend to be flattered and face Dao Xingyun with a happy and respectful attitude, which made him very uncomfortable. Qianzhan was afraid that if he stayed in the Palace of Stars for too long, he would be seen through by the seventh hallmaster before he could figure out his background. Therefore, he ignored the seventh hallmaster's enthusiasm to stay and insisted on leaving. Ji Tianxing followed behind him, and he had been very quiet and inconspicuous, so he was not noticed by Dao Xingyun. It was not until Qianzhan and others left the Palace of Stars and flew back to their residence that Ji Tianxing found that Qianzhan was obviously relieved. Ji Tianxing secretly laughed at this. With Qianzhan's shrewdness and scheming methods, even with Qianzhan's full help, he could not become a hallmaster, let alone be mentioned in the same breath as Dao Xingyun. On the other side, Dao Xingyun enthusiastically sent Qianzhan and the others off. He stood at the entrance of the hall and watched Qianzhan and the others fly into the sky. Their figures gradually disappeared into the distance, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a meaningful sneer. In the past few years he had also heard from the many soldiers under the Divine Hall that the first Hallmaster had promised to fight for the position of Hallmaster. With his cautious personality, he had long regarded hidden warfare as a potential opponent and enemy. But later on, when he seriously investigated hidden warfare's information, he discovered that hidden warfare's strength was very low. Even after 10,000 years of breaking through to the God Emperor realm, he had not made any progress. Coupled with hidden warfare's fiery temper and personality, he was a fierce general who fought on the battlefield, but he didn't have much shrewdness and schemes. Therefore, Dao Xingyun analyzed and judged that it would be difficult for hidden warfare to pose a threat to him. Dao Xingyun was also deeply surprised when the guard came to inform her that Hidden Warrior had come to visit and congratulate her. He was still guessing and trying to figure out what was going on. How could a shrewd person like him have such courage? Could it be that there was an expert who gave him advice? Or could it be that the information about hidden warfare that he had previously investigated was all a disguise that hidden warfare had put on for many years? With such doubts in mind, Dao Xingyun did not hesitate to receive hidden warfare. He personally talked and interacted with him. After a few rounds of verbal exchanges, Dao Xingyun finally found out about hidden warfare's background. That's right, hidden warfare had received advice from an expert and had improved compared to before. But his improvement was minimal and his nature could not be changed. In the end, it was impossible for him to be too shrewd and scheming. It was because of this that Dao Xingyun was completely at ease and removed his vigilance and wariness towards hidden warfare. In his opinion, hidden warfare was completely unqualified to fight with him and could not threaten his position. Hidden warfare was very depressed and returned to his residence with a black face. Many of the guards saw his expression and guessed that he must have run into a wall when he went to find the seventh hall master. Even if there was no conflict between the two, hidden warfare definitely did not gain any advantage. But everyone had already expected this result and did not feel surprised or strange. Only the immortal guards and the young geniuses and elites living nearby secretly rejoiced in hidden warfare's misfortune when they saw him run into a wall. In fact, although hidden warfare was not shrewd, he was not to the extent that he did not even have this little bit of self-control. As long as he did not want to be seen as a joke, he could completely control his emotions and not let anyone see any clues. But he did not conceal it and even slightly exaggerated his black face and did not say a word. This was no doubt another performance that was specially made for everyone to see and even the hallmasters to see. Just like what Qian Gui had taught him, he could not show his dissatisfaction but also had to show the regret and unwillingness in his heart. So far, hidden warfare had succeeded. It was just that his method was a little lacking and he did not do it well enough. After hidden warfare returned to his residence, he shut himself in his study and reported the situation to Qian Gui. Ji Tianxing returned to his room to rest. He silently recalled Dao Xingyun's every action and every word, including some undetectable details. He wanted to sort out those trivial details and find out more information about Dao Xingyun from them. This move was of course effective. It also allowed him to analyze some information from Dao Xingyun's words and actions and details. For example, the head hall master appreciated and supported Dao Xingyun. There was no doubt about this. But Ji Tianxing believed that the head hall master did not confer Dao Xingyun as the seventh hall master only because of this. It was most likely because he was the chosen one. In addition, Dao Xingyun said that he was on good terms with the other hall masters and everyone got along very well. But when he said these words, there was a slight change in his eyes and his tone and voice paused for a moment. From this, it could be seen that his relationship with the other hall masters was not as harmonious as he said. If the 6 hall masters appreciated him and were on good terms with him, then there would be more palaces and houses near his Fanqing palace and there would be more people. Ji Tianxing thought to himself that the other hall masters' attitudes towards Dao Xingyun might be the breakthrough point that he wanted to target. But as for which hall master did not like Dao Xingyun, further investigation was needed. In addition, Dao Xingyun had just joined the Taiyu Shrine and knew that he was in a difficult situation. Therefore he was especially modest, cautious and magnanimous. He wanted to leave a good impression on everyone and build a good relationship with the experts in the Taiyu secret realm as soon as possible. Only in this way could he gradually develop and accumulate power. Only in this way would he have the qualifications to be on equal footing with the other hall masters in the future. Next, Qian Gui will probably persuade Qian Zhan to pay a visit to the other hall masters to test their attitudes. I only need to follow Qian Zhan to get some information. After pondering and analyzing, Ji Tianxing concluded and patiently waited for Qian Zhan's next move. Just as expected, Qian Zhan rested in the study for an entire day. The next morning he ordered the guard captain to prepare a gift. The guard captain asked him what he was going to do and he replied that he was going to visit the second hall master. Chapter 4682. Everyone knew that Qian Zhan was visiting the second palace master to sound out his opinion. He wanted to test the attitude of the other palace masters. He wanted to work together with them to go against the seventh palace master. However, his motive was obvious. The guard captain could not help but remind him, "Governor, isn't it a little rushed for us to visit the second palace master today?" Qian Zhan obviously understood the guard captain's intention. He waved his hand and said, "What are you worried about? Are you afraid that the first palace master will see through my intention and harm me? You are thinking too much. I patrol the southern region all year round and can only return to the mystic realm once every few hundred years. When I was cultivating in the mystic realm, the palace masters gave me a lot of guidance and help. Since I have returned to report to the first palace master, isn't it reasonable for me to pay a visit to the palace masters? If anyone spreads rumors behind my back, that person is narrow-minded and is slandering me and the palace masters." Qian Zhan spoke righteously and sternly. His voice was especially loud and dignified. Obviously he did not say this to the guard captain. He purposely let it out for everyone to hear. He did this because the Qian Zhan sect wanted him to say this to shut everyone up. The guard captain quickly nodded in agreement and said, "Governor is right. The palace masters took good care of you back then. Since you have returned to the mystic realm, you should pay them a visit." After half an hour, the guard captain finished preparing the gifts. Qian Zhan brought the guard captain and 3 guards and left his residence. He rushed to the giant peak where the second palace master lived. This time Qian Zhan did not need to take attendance. He still brought Ji Tianxing and the other 2 with him. Since the other guards were not willing to go, no one took the initiative to sign up. These 3 guards had been following him since he returned to the mystic realm. He was already used to it. The peak where the second palace master lived was obviously more lively and solemn. There were more than 40 palaces and more than 10 mansions on the peak with a radius of dozens of miles. More than 10,000 people lived there. Among them were 5,000 immortal guards, 6,000 young geniuses and elite divine kings, and a few thousand servants and odd job workers. If one observed carefully, they would find that the guards in the palaces and mansions that were arranged in picturesque disorder were full of energy and confidence. Even the servants and odd job workers were calm and composed, and their hearts were filled with satisfaction. After all, they were the second hall master's subordinates. Their status in the great universe mystic realm was second class. Leading Ji Tianxing and the other three, Qianzhan landed outside the divine palace where the second palace master lived, immediately attracting the attention of countless people. The guards guarding the palace, the pedestrians passing by the square in front of the palace, and the servants and handymen all looked at Qianzhan in surprise. Back then Qianzhan was also a young genius selected from the various branches. He cultivated in the Grand Universe Secret Realm for more than 10,000 times before breaking through to the God Emperor realm. He had lived in the Grand Space Secret Realm for a very long time, so most of the young geniuses, servants and guards knew him. Everyone was well aware of his deeds and rumors. Now, seeing him outside the second palace master's divine palace, everyone was surprised and curious. This fellow's position as palace master had been snatched away. Instead of complaining to the first palace master or confronting the seventh palace master, what was he doing here at the second palace master's place? Under the puzzled gazes of the crowd, Qianzhan walked to the gate of the divine palace without changing his expression and told the guards his purpose. Southern Patrol Commander Qianzhan is here to visit the second palace master. Please inform him. The guards guarding the gate of the divine palace looked at each other. Some of the smarter ones had already guessed Qianzhan's purpose. One of the guards said, "Please wait a moment." Then he turned and entered the divine palace to inform the second palace master. Qianzhan did not say much. He stood outside the gate and waited patiently. Not long after, the guard who informed him returned. He looked at Qianzhan indifferently and said, "Southern Patrol Commander, the palace master is cultivating in seclusion. It is inconvenient for him to receive guests. Please go back." As soon as he said that, many of the guards and passers-by in front of the palace could not help but want to laugh. Qianzhan also felt embarrassed, but he could not show it. He would not give up easily. Since the second palace master is cultivating in seclusion, I will not disturb him. However, I have benefited greatly from the guidance of the second palace master, and have always regarded the second palace master as my teacher. It is reasonable for me to come and visit my teacher today. I hope this guard captain can accept this token of appreciation on behalf of the second palace master. After that, Qianzhan asked the guard captain to take out the space ring that contained a large number of treasures and handed it to the guard captain. The guard captain had obviously been instructed by the second palace master to guard against Qianzhan's trick and decisively refused. "Southern Patrol Commander, you don't have to leave the gift. The palace master said that he already knows the purpose of your visit and what you want to say and do. The palace master asked me to give you a sentence. Endure what ordinary people cannot endure, and you will achieve what ordinary people cannot. That's all I have to say. I hope the Southern Patrol Commander knows what to do." After saying this, the silver-armored guard captain returned to his post and didn't say another word. Qianzhan frowned and thought for a moment. He guessed that the second palace master did not want to see him for the time being to avoid suspicion. The second palace master did not even want to accept his gift. There was no point in continuing to argue. Qianzhan, who had hit a wall, could only turn and leave with Ji Tianxing and the others. Under the gloating, sympathetic and mocking gazes of the crowd, Qianzhan and the others flew into the sky and rushed to the mountain peak where the third palace master lived. On the way, Qianzhan was neither too fast nor too slow. His expression was calm and collected. To be honest, he had expected that the second palace master would not want to see him. For tens of thousands of years, among the palace masters of the Taiyu Shrine, the first palace master was the absolute leader and pillar. There was no doubt about it. As for the second palace master, his position had always been aloof. He did not get too close to any of the palace masters, but he also did not target any of them. In general, the second palace master had always maintained a neutral and impartial attitude. Perhaps this had something to do with the second palace master's special position. His authority was second only to the first palace master. Usually, the first palace master did not want to deal with many of the divine hall's affairs personally. If he roped in another hall master or suppressed another hall master, then he would be forming a clique and strengthening his own forces. As long as his power grew, it would be threatening and challenging the first palace master's authority. This situation was very dangerous for the second palace master. Therefore, he could maintain a neutral position for tens of thousands of years and never show any ambition. As for the third palace master, Qianzhan was confident that he could meet him with his own eyes. After all, the third palace master had helped him the most when he was cultivating in the Taiyu Mystery Land. As expected, Qianzhan led Ji Tianxing and the others to the divine palace where the third palace master lived and asked the guard to inform him. Not long after, the guard returned and led him into the divine palace to meet the third palace master. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.